Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Salt Lake City School District Board of Education. Tonight is a business meeting. It is November 19th, 2024. I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us and for your participation in the lives and achievements of all of our students here in Salt Lake City School District. Next, we will have a Pledge of Allegiance. Alan, do you mind leading us in the pledge tonight?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. I'd like to take this next couple of minutes to recognize our classified SLEA and SLCSD Association representatives this evening. Tonight, the classified association groups are represented by Buildings and Grounds President Aaliyah Ocampo. Child Nutrition is represented by President Tanya Slaughter. Transportation is represented by President Chris Krogh. SLEA, we have President Mike Harmon. I don't know if I see Chelsea here yet. Just Mike tonight. But Chelsea, thank you for all you do in your capacity as Vice President of SLEA. And from the Salt Lake Association of School Administrators, they're represented by President Adrian Lobato, and I know I had another representative here this evening. Can't remember where they're at. Oh, I kind of see them back there. Thank you for joining us this evening. I can't quite see you. Nonetheless, thank you for all that you do on behalf of employees in the benefit of students. Our first recognition this evening is the Science of Reading Awards. Superintendent, would you please introduce this one? Who's presenting this to us? Is it Chelsea? Dr. Chelsea Malou. Thank you.
I'll just invite myself, if that's okay. I would like to bring our award winners up, and then I will tell you a little bit about the awards. We have Rochelle Stewart from Meadowlark Elementary, Elizabeth Holloway and Debbie Palm from Backman Elementary, and Matthew Teeter, principal at Backman Elementary. If you all come up to be recognized. The Science of Reading Awards are for teachers and administrators who have gone above and beyond to implement the science of reading through instruction and interventions. To advance reading outcomes in their schools and classrooms, these educators and school leaders have continued to examine and adjust reading instruction based on data, participated in personal learning and professional development opportunities, and worked to create a supportive culture within their schools and classrooms. Beginning in 2021, USBE has invested in professional learning for K-3 general education teachers, special education teachers, coaches, principals, and local education agency leaders in the science of reading in order to improve literacy instruction and student outcomes. As educators began completing their professional learning, USBE began observing classrooms across the state, looking at how that learning was being implemented. In May of 2023, USBE created a rubric to determine the level of implementation and solicited nominations for these awards. Those educators scoring 90% or higher were recognized with a Science of Reading Award. The recipients of this award are the key to helping Utah reach its goal of 70% of third grade students reading on grade level or more. When these amazing educators were given these awards from USBE, they actually told us that all 4 of them received 100% on the rubric. In Rochelle's nomination,
They weren't going to leave you hanging there.
In Rochelle's nomination, it was stated that she is a teacher, leader, and literacy mentor to others and a great contributor to the success of her school. Elizabeth Holloway and Debbie Palm co-teach at Backman, and their nominations stated that they utilize their data from Acadians and 95% group to plan their instruction and teach all aspects of the science of reading. In Principal Matthew Teeter's nomination, it was talked about the systems that he has implemented to improve literacy for the students. He has engaged in several professional learning opportunities and takes what he has learned and puts it into immediate practice. Please join me in congratulating these amazing educators.
back up for a photo.
So we're gonna have you in the middle. Oh, and then you can smile.
You have to come up right
Members
here.
that would like to come down to you to join our
Then you
awardees.
guys get to die.
Would board members be up for coming down to join our awardees? Thank you so much.
You guys can just stay on the row behind us.
It's the first time I actually get to look like it.
You guys are squeezing over here so Alan. Perfect. Okay. That looks great. Everyone looks great. Okay, are you guys ready? I'm gonna take a few. Ready? 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna take 1, 2, 6. There we go. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, thank you and congratulations to our Science of Reading Award winners and for all of your accomplishments. The second recognition this evening, unfortunately, the Science Team of the Year wasn't able to be here, so we'll save that for another time. Moving on to our consent agenda, I will entertain a motion from the board.
I move that we accept the consent agenda as posted.
Second.
Any further discussion to the motion?
I have one thing that I wanted to clarify. I had a person reach out via email to ask about the Joint Education Evaluation Committee and why there were so few parents. So I just wanted to ask our business administrator if he could clarify that this is just a compliance committee for a very specific portion of the ECAP review process, and it's not like a general education evaluation.
Right. First of all, the committee, the makeup of the committee is laid out in state law, and also it is strictly for the limited purpose of the ECAP, the teacher evaluation process.
Thank you for that clarification, Brian.
I was hoping to get a clarification on the request for contract accountant. That's exhibit 1B7. In that, I understand the request was for an accountant in the Salt Lake Foundation. The support documentation included the minutes of the Salt Lake Foundation. And by our approving the consent agenda, I just want clarification that we are not approving the minutes of that board meeting.
Right. I'll just clarify, those minutes were attached for board reference only, as this position will be funded with Salt Lake Education Foundation funds. We just wanted the board to know and have evidence that that was approved by the foundation board. But what you're voting on is simply the approval of the position.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Any further discussion to the motion? Approving the consent agenda? All right. We'll start with a roll call vote with Vice President Williams.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Chrissy Sabat, yes.
Excellent, that motion carries. The next item on our agenda this evening is our request to speak. I do have a statement that the board has requested that I read before we engage in that part of the agenda this evening. The board enjoys the opportunity to hear from the public during the comment portion of its meetings. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to remind you of our board rules governing your comments. The total time reserved for public comment is not to exceed 15 minutes, with all speakers or groups limited to 3 minutes. The board will not allow public comments during board meetings that are slanderous, obscene, or otherwise violate state or federal law. Employees and/or their representatives may not use the public comment period to address issues that should be raised through existing formal communication channels or established grievance or negotiation procedures. I'd also like to explain that unless the speaker's topic is already on the agenda, state law prohibits the board from taking action on items raised during the public comment period. However, if it seems appropriate to the circumstances, I may direct district staff to follow up with a speaker on the topic discussed. All right, our first speaker this evening is Holly Reynolds. And Holly, if you're with us, board members, Holly did also submit a written statement that you'll find in your folders. Holly, thank you for joining us.
Okay, I stand in front of 40-plus kids multiple times a day, and I'm never nervous, but I'm a little terrified right now. But thanks, y'all, for letting me speak tonight. I am a teacher at West High School. I'm a social studies teacher. This is my 8th year at West, and I need to start with, I love my job. Even on the worst days, I think it's the best job ever. 11 days ago, there was a shooting at West High. I found out about the shooting at a concert waiting for a main band to play. It was a friend who said, "Hey, you work at West? What happened today?" I knew nothing about it. The next morning, a friend who teaches in a state across the country texted to check in with me and ask if I was okay and if I needed anything. With the frequent press coverage of school shootings, it's easy to get complacent. But a shooting at your workplace is a big deal. It deserves a response. We have not had engagement from the district or board since that day as a faculty. I'm here because we need your help. Safety and security concerns at West High need to be addressed in a meaningful way. The shooting on our campus was a wake-up call. Our most important job is to keep kids safe, and most days we're just getting lucky that nothing that bad happened that day. We occupy a huge campus, and we have 4 floors, multiple wings, and 2,600 students. Security issues are our main concern. We don't know at any time who is in our building. There are students roaming the halls. We have a vast space, and we cannot meet our safety needs without y'all's support. I'm an expert in education. I can tell you the best way to lead a discussion. I can tell you how to foster critical thinking skills. I studied and practiced best strategies to help students learn. But the reality is none of our efforts matter if students are worried about basic safety while they're at school. Kids can't learn unless they feel safe. Additionally, we have over 100 faculty and staff members that show up every day, every school day at West, and we deserve a safe space to work. We need you to hear us. We're asking you to understand the challenges we face with security and work with us to implement meaningful solutions. I invite you to come to West and spend part of your day with us. Talk to our admin, shadow our advocates, talk to our teachers and our students. Ashley Anderson has already accepted this invitation, and I really appreciate that. We invite others to do the same. This is a community issue. It's not just about West High, and it needs a community solution. We need partners working collaboratively with us. Our students deserve it, and so do I. Thank you.
Our next speaker this evening is Ella Franson, and board members, there is also written documentation from her as well. Ella, thank you. Please join us at the podium.
Hello, my name is Ella Franson. I'm a student at West High School. I'm a junior, and it's my 5th year at West High School as I was an ELPer. I'm also here to address some of the safety concerns, but one of my main concerns is actually the school bathrooms. I came into this building and I noticed you guys all have unlocked bathrooms. That is not the case for the students at West High School all throughout the day. Often, I don't know if I've ever gone a single day where all the bathrooms at school are unlocked, are usable, are clean. Oftentimes the locks on the stalls are broken. There's no toilet paper. There's no toilet paper dispensers. The sinks are broken. There's no soap. This is especially bad in the men's restrooms. And a lot of this has to do with, I think, obviously student behavior. And there's also a lot of kids vaping in there. And I think this comes down to lack of enforcement. I've looked into the board policies. And the board policies, at least as far as I can tell in terms of student vaping, there's many referral processes and school suspensions, but it's never advocated, or sorry, not advocated, like moved to a more legal level. And I looked into state law, and it seems that while students who are caught vaping cannot be initially referred to the police, which I think is a good thing, I'm not really pro more criminalization. After like the first time they can be, and then they can get a formal citation, which costs money. I simply think a lot of students, well, first of all, I think vaping a lot of times is a mental health issue. The buzz you get from it brings you away from your real life. But for a lot of students, it's also just, they think they're cool, they're addicted, and I personally would like the district to take more of a hardline stance on it and refer more of them to law enforcement. In my opinion, if students had to pay the citation cost, anywhere from like $60 to $100, they would actually not vape in school bathrooms, and that's really what I'm advocating for. I like that the current process does have them being referred to programs that would get them to quit vaping, but I think in general, we need to do something that teenagers actually care about, and that's money for a lot of us. We work really minimum wage jobs, we don't have much money, and I want people out of the bathrooms vaping. It's so uncomfortable to walk between people vaping in the bathrooms. It's just not safe. I'm inhaling vape fumes all day long. And also, in terms of school security, like, I don't think it helps, but like the vaping issue. But one thing to note with school security is while I want my school to be a safe campus, I also do not like how other students are penalized for just existing. Every time I walk through the metal detectors, my physical body seizes up in case I'm pulled aside, and I obviously never have anything on me, but just the act of being searched or being pulled away, or like literally the sense of eternal dread I get every time I walk through a metal detector. My entire body seizes up, and obviously I don't really know what the solution is, but if you guys were to come to West, I hope you talk to students because they're the ones affected the most. I really care about teachers, but teachers don't even have to walk through these metal detectors, and like my classmates are the one dying outside in the parking lot. Thank you.
Our next speaker this evening is Riley Pickle.
I do the same thing as Holly and talk to a bunch of kids all day, and I'm still terrified. So hello. I am just going to read something that was written on behalf of the faculty that's here. So this is a representation of a group that's here, just so you know. Good evening, board members. I am speaking as a representative of the faculty, staff, parents, and students from West High that you see in this room today, and the written comments from them sent in about this issue. In one of those written comments, you will find a letter from 57 West High faculty to the district, board, and our administration requesting support and assistance. I also gave several copies of this letter if you'd like a physical version, which I think you can see. Okay. I want to read you the introduction to this, not to restate the requests already outlined, but to emphasize that we want to work collaboratively with teachers, students, the board, the district, and our administration on this issue. The introduction to our letter reads as follows. Salt Lake City School District and Board, we write to you as concerned educators on behalf of our students and school community. As you must know, last week one of our students was shot. We know that you must be as deeply as affected by this as we are. This awful, sobering event and many other equally unsafe situations in our past have compelled us to ask for your help. Respectfully, we write to you today to share a call to urgent action and express our concern regarding school safety at West High. We are frustrated by what appears to be a lack of action, accountability, and planning from our district. Often it feels like our district just doesn't understand our perspective, although we know you must be trying your best. We are worried for the safety of our students, fellow teachers, administration, staff, SROs, advocates, families, and visitors. We need help. We invite you to visit our school as soon as possible so that you can have firsthand knowledge of our unique safety challenges. Furthermore, we ask for the following to be implemented swiftly for the safety of our Panther community. The body of the letter outlines possible suggestions that 57 faculty members came up with. These points were brainstormed outside of school on our own time when we could have been doing whatever we typically do on a weeknight, which, if we're being honest, is usually grading. However, as I'm sure you can relate to, we felt that preventing our students from being shot was of the utmost importance, so we put the grading aside and decided to ask for your collaboration instead. As the letter concludes, so will I. We trust that you will receive this letter in good faith, as it reflects the sincerity of our intentions in sending it. Although speaking up is daunting, please know that we do so because we love and want to protect our Panther community. We know that you share the same goals and objectives and appreciate your action towards these goals so far. Thank you for your consideration, and thank you in advance for your swift action. Thanks.
Thanks, Riley. Our next speaker this evening is Emily Alder.
Hi, I'm Emily Alder, and I'm also a social studies teacher at West High. It's my 4th year at West. Good evening, board members. I'm speaking in solidarity with the faculty present in the room today and the written comments you have received. I want to share a list of security events that we have brainstormed as a faculty, so you might have insight into what we're asking you to collaborate on with us. Keep in mind this is just from memory, and it's not an official record as we're not administration, and we don't know the whole story with certain incidents. First and foremost, as you know, a student was shot at West High School around noon on Thursday last week. Additionally, we had a student stabbed several times in a bathroom last year who had to be helped by a single teacher while waiting for additional help. Both of these incidents were incredibly scary for our faculty and in some cases traumatizing. Here are the incidents that have occurred since the beginning of the year that we brainstormed together. An ELP student was assaulted with their weapon and phone stolen. They were left with their pants down on the floor. There are often strangers who visit our campus at all hours of the day and night, and some are adults and some are students from other schools. Bathrooms and locker rooms are constantly vandalized. Vaping, drug use, and sloughing are all common in bathrooms around the entire school, and we cannot monitor bathrooms 24/7, even if we didn't staff our weapons detectors with advocates. In early October, at least 2 fights occurred involving the same groups of students. Mace, rocks, and parents were involved. The doors in the field house are constantly propped open by kids. Students slough, they hide, and visit there constantly. When you ask them to go to class, they talk back to you, ignore you, or lie about where they're supposed to be. One teacher had multiple interactions with the same student throughout the term. The student ran out of class into a busy hallway, pushed the teacher, and threw items at students. Students will aggressively pound on locked doors during class time. They'll also shut the doors while running by. Some of the doors slam when this happens, which is scary when it's heard in nearby rooms. Students in the hall will talk or gesture to students in class if the door is open, ask the teacher to hang out in the class, or purposely come in class to be disruptive, shouting, making moaning noises, things like that. I personally experienced last year a fight in my classroom. It began well after the bell had rung and was started by a group of girls who freely walked the hall to confront and film a student in my room. This resulted in large bruises on my arms and legs. I have been ignored and cussed at. I've broken up fights and domestic violence situations. I have caught freshmen vaping in the stairwells, non-students wandering the halls, and been confronted by parents during class hours. All of these have happened during class times when students should have been safe in classrooms. These are just a few examples we came up with. We understand the district and the board cannot be aware of every incident in every school, and that we are not aware of action taken after the incident most of the time. However, we hope we can come together to come up with solutions and protocols to prevent these behaviors and acts of violence going forward. Thank you.
Our last speaker this evening, and Jill, you'll have to forgive me, I can't read your last name. It looks like the pen might have been dying. But the podium's yours, Jill. Thank you for being here.
I couldn't hear that, I apologize.
I said the podium's yours. Thanks for being here. And sorry.
My name's Joe Vignona. I'm sorry I just wrote in. I got here.
No, it's okay.
I didn't plan on speaking. I walked in, a few kids kind of came over and like, you should, I'm in the field house. I'm Coach Joe. I teach and I coach. And I guess the perspective from the field house is we are in there, I kind of feel like on an island out there. And as a teacher, we've gotten some new PE teachers this year, and they've been really great, but our issue is we can't teach our class. We're kind of 50% security and 50% teachers, so we're having to leave our classrooms to kick kids out of halls and clear the downstairs, clean the upstairs, clear the stairwells. We go back into our class, and they're right back in there again, and everyone's shared most of the information, I think, the perspective that you guys need to hear, and I won't take up another, full 3 minutes, but there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of holes, and we got really lucky that the situation that happened the way it did. That west parking lot, there's different parts of the school, different areas, there's a lot of wild stuff going on, and I just think it does need attention, and we hope to work with you guys. And I told these guys the biggest thing the kids are fired up about are bathrooms, as I'm glad a student came up, but bathrooms are rough, and a lot of that is just, people just hang out there all day long. I clear them out, you go back 20 minutes later, they're back in the bathroom, and I don't know what the solution is, I don't, but hopefully we can work together. Appreciate you guys hearing us all, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
thank you to everybody who spoke tonight. Not to minimize our adults, but thank you, students, for coming in and advocating for your own safety needs this evening as well. And thank you. We just really appreciate your participation. Moving into our next agenda items this evening, we have a study session. The first item is a review of the 2023-24 student end-of-year assessment data and school improvement report. Superintendent, would you like to introduce this evening?
Yes, Dr. Tiffany Hall has put a presentation together just reporting out on the numbers from spring testing. And Dr. Christine Marriott is also here to present on the CSI, TSI status of schools and answer your questions that you might have about that, as more schools were named into the improvement status this year.
Can I just say congratulations to the student leaving who was in the musical? He played the President of the United States.
All right.
I love his way.
Presidential.
Do I need to drag it over?
Sam will come to your rescue.
Yes. Shows my dog, but no. I was gonna change my dog picture tonight in case that happened, but I forgot.
Dr. Hall, while that's pulling up, would there be a point when you could explain some of those acronyms? I think that would be helpful for our listeners, like ATSI and.
Oh, those will be Dr.
That'll be
Marriott.
me, yeah.
Okay.
Third slide in has your cheat sheet for the acronyms.
Oh, okay, good. It still doesn't want to read it. It read it for a minute. Let's see if I can drag it over here without messing anything up. Okay. Okay, now that we are set, it's good to be with you and talk just a little bit about some of the data that we've had from last year. Every year, you know, we try to think about how to present this in an efficient way, but yet still in a thoughtful way. So you'll notice that we did in fact attach a large packet of additional data for your work or your review to this one, but I am going to go through some of kind of the highlights and trends that we've seen. First, I just want to remind us that we statewide, did I just go out?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh,
There we go, all right. I don't know what to tell you. That we do have the second highest percentage of students in the state that are economically disadvantaged. And we also have the largest number, or the largest percentage of students in the state who are English language learners. And that is one of the things that makes us unique. Somebody asked me today if I could describe the district in one word, what would that word be? And I said, well, it would be inclusive. That's really what we work and strive to do, is make sure that we're providing that education that includes all of our learners. We have seen an ongoing uptick in the number of students we have that are acquiring English. And another thing that we note, because it makes a difference for some of our data, that we are the district in the state with the third highest mobility rate. And what that means is that almost 1 in 5 of our students move at least once every school year, some of them more. So all of these things give us a question that we really need to ask as we think about our performance data. Really, what is our goal? And we've said this before, it's to be consistent and to be excellent, because we do need to be inclusive, supportive, and rigorous, understanding that every year our students will change. We do not have the same body of students every year. We continue to see that movement from school to school, or district to district, or state to state, country to country, happens for our students every year. So what we need to do is build those strong structures that will help bring students in at those times and make sure that we can move them toward being successful. So I'm going to go through just a couple of our major required tests. This first one is our KEEP, that's our kindergarten entry and exit profile. The top line is our ELA proficiency over the last 3 years. You can see that our students continue to come in their ELA in the 50s and leave in the 60s. And so we do see continued growth in our ELA as we look at that. Our even larger growth is in our math proficiency, as we have students really developing a lot of those math structures or different pieces with that math understanding. We know that some of this growth is really supported by our pre-K classrooms that have connected very strongly with our K educators. They're using many of the same materials, the same math programs, our Eureka programs in the pre-K, and moving that up so that we can be consistent across that pre-K and kindergarten field. When they get into kindergarten, we're looking here at our Acadience data. This is kind of a new way for us to look at the data, so I'm just going to explain it a little bit. The first box shows that close to 70% of our kindergarten students are at or above the benchmark at the end of the year. And about 61% of them make typical or more growth every year. Now, the chart on the bottom is kind of an interesting one. This chart shows where students entered and where they left. So this is a chart that describes the kind of movement that we make. And it shows some interesting trends, and we'll talk about the trends, and then I'll talk about some of the things that we're doing with that information. So the top line is the line for students that enter our schools well below benchmark. And so at the end of the year, we had 40% of the students who entered. So think of each one of these lines as equaling 100. And so if I had 100 students that started the year well below benchmark, at the end of the year, 40% of them, or 40 students, were still well below benchmark. 60% of them had improved. And so out of that 100% in that line, we would look at that and say, okay, that is our most impacted group. That's the group that we need to make the most growth with. How are we working with that group? And so in kindergarten, and hold on to this because it will look different in third grade. In kindergarten, we're able to move about 60% up. Now, 1 in 4 of those only come up, they don't come all the way up to our at or above benchmark, but we are moving them forward. The next line is out of, again, say 100 students that enter below benchmark. We moved 27% of them, 27% of them stayed in that position. We lost some ground with just about 10% of them, but then the rest of them moved to at or above where we would consider our benchmark to be. So, and then when we look at our above, or our well above, which is the bottom line, you'll see that we managed to keep about 75% of our students who enter above benchmark in that same place. Now, this gets a little tougher when we shift to grade 3, of course, because the content gets harder, the language demands get harder. As we have students entering and exiting, we see some of those things happen. And so, again, you know, our proficiency at the end of grade 3 is at about 61%. We have about 68% of our students making that average typical growth. But what you'll see in third grade is that those students who by third grade are well below average, that becomes a much harder block to begin to move forward and improve. And that's why we know that the most critical years that we're working with students' literacy skills are in kindergarten, first and second grade. That's when we're able to make the most movement to make sure that we're moving them towards that proficiency mark. But then as you look down, and again, thinking about those 100 students, do you know how intimidating it is to be sitting next to Dr. Marriott talking about data? I just have to, I just have to say, I'm gonna say something wrong, just don't look at her face, look at mine, because, you know, it makes me really, really nervous, you know, that most of the state data comes from Dr. Marriott's formulas. Okay, so sorry, little fan girl there for a minute. But as we look down this chart, we see that our students who were below benchmark, 25% of them, again, stayed there, but we were able to move up over 50% of those students, and those numbers increase. So by third grade, we start to see what sometimes, you know, when it's good, we call it the Matthew principle, but we start to see that principle of if our students are not achieving, it is harder and harder to help them move forward and achieve. So that is one of the things as we look at our K-12 literacy plan, we have really been thinking about how do we address the needs of those older readers who need to develop that at or above proficiency mark. And so this is just one of those ways that we're looking at that. Another way that we're looking at this, though, because when we think about what does it look like for us in this district, are we making a difference with the programs and the professional learning and the coaching and support that we provide to teachers as job-embedded support? What does that mean for us in the district and for our teachers? So this is a proficiency scale, and the green line is our district average. And one of the things that we want to look at is a multi-year success rate. So if we have had a student that has been here more than 2 years, so they've been here at least 1 year, so second grade and third grade, that's represented by the dark blue line. And students that were only in our district in third grade are represented by the light blue line. And so what we see is even having students for that consistent high-quality education over 2 years makes a difference in our ability to move them on those scales. So we continue to think about this because one of the things that I think is an important message to our families and to our students is that when you trust us with your child for multiple years, we are able to really help that student improve and develop in those skills.
Can I ask a question about this? I have a couple questions, but the first is when we're looking at 2020 here, we didn't take end-of-year tests in 2020. So this is just Acadians like the screener at the beginning of the year?
Yeah, we were able to get Acadians some of that data at the end of the year for 2020.
Oh,
yeah. So
okay.
it's
so
not.
So when you say some of, what does that mean in terms of the reliability of the number?
It's probably not our best year for reliability, but I think we just left it in there for continuity.
And then as we look at Acadians here and at the former table, I wanted to raise that last year, Brian had asked a lot of questions about Acadians, and he specifically asked for and was told we would get a comprehensive analysis of that lower band. And then we also asked for some of the information about programs that the board had funded in relationship to these years. So what year in this average, did job embedded coaching come on board? What year did we see letters training enter? And it's my understanding from emailing with Dr. Grant that we won't have some of those answers today, but I want to point out that this is one of the things I think we're kind of bad at, that we asked these questions, and now we have the report of information, but we haven't answered the questions from the prior year. So it's a little bit hard to move forward with thinking, did what we pay for in the last year work? Right. And thank you, Jenny.
Right. So
and also,
I can address a couple of those.
Did we get, an answer to Brian's question about Acadians as we're diving in, and the complication, he reached out and said that teachers felt compelled to really move forward one band of kids, and it was really hard to understand what was happening with that lower band of kids. So I just wanted to raise those and make sure we're documenting them somewhere so we can answer them even if we don't have answers now. But thank you for giving me information about the 2020 number and any other answers you may have for that.
So job-embedded coaching started, well, I've been here 10 years, and it was here when I came.
Right.
So, this data would not reflect that as a new intervention.
Okay.
As for letters, we are working on a comprehensive look at our letters data, but as with any change effort, as you know, it takes 3 to 5 years to really see that come through. So as we're beginning the initial look at that trend data, we really only have 1 year where teachers have been implementing post-completing that program. So that is still a new piece of data. So we are looking at a variety of things that I think we've discussed from this table before, such as how many years have they been in the Salt Lake City School District, so that we have a sense of how many years they've been teaching, although that may not be complete. What does it look like in terms of whether or not they had a reading endorsement in addition to their letters training? When did they complete their education? All of those pieces. And so we are looking at that, but again, where we would really begin to see trend data would not be in the first or even the second year of that 2 years letter program, but in the subsequent 3 to 5 years of really being in that implementation mode. So, I have heard very clearly that we are needing to look at that more carefully, and we are beginning that evaluation process and pulling that data together so that we can begin to add to it every year to show those trends and those different pieces. But it isn't quite at a point yet where we would see a definite up or down because of letters, because we are still really making sure that teachers are implementing it well. Although, as you saw from the awards earlier tonight, we do have teachers that have really, been able to implement that well in their classroom and do all of those things. So when we do see that trend data, we expect that it will be positive. And so we should be able to have some of that worked out later this year to show you beginning trends. Last year we didn't have enough data to be able to do that because we were still working through the training process itself.
That's really helpful. Can I ask one more question that I just noticed? I'm looking at some of the things you're talking about, and I'm comparing the percentages here, and I'm just wondering, when we look at this dip in mobility, this doesn't describe if our mobility rate has changed. It's just describing the scores of mobile students. Is the rate of mobile students the same between 2018 and 2024, or do you see this a similar change?
It is within a couple of points, so it's not statistically significant. So, for instance.
So in other words, the dip we see is like a real dip? Okay.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So
Thank you,
now.
Dr. Hall, for that explanation. I'm glad to hear it's on the docket.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So this is our RISE data. RISE moves us from a reading test, which is Acadience, where we're really looking at fluency and comprehension, to content tests, where we're looking at our language arts, not necessarily just reading, math and science. And so these are comprehensive. You do have a more detailed look in the packet that we attached for review. But just as an overview, this is on the left-hand side. That chart, those set of bars, are language arts, math, and science at the state level, and then language arts, math, and science at the district level. So looking at these, you can see that we are close to our state average. This is, of course, all of our grades, 3 through 8. We're within about 2 points of the state average for language arts and math. We're a little lower in science at 4%, a little bit lower than that. And then you can see that demographic breakdown as we look. The list under that is our proficiency by all of those categories. And again, you do have that broken down more deeply in that packet for review. We continue to work on the idea that as our students are coming in and acquiring language, that being, in a state that our Wasatch Front has, we're looking at a statewide comparison here, and as the most urban and diverse district in the state, we are still pretty much holding our own with the state as we look at these. which is nice to see across grades 3 through 8. The next slides, I'm going to focus, as our goal is to focus on literacy this year, on those RISE proficiencies in language arts. So this is the same kind of slide, but we are looking here at that stable over 3 through 6th grade. And so if they attended more than one school between 3 and 6, because those are the years of this test. So when looking at that, you can see again that when we have that consistent pattern of attendance in our schools, then we are able to demonstrate that higher proficiency as we build that consistency. Looking at our middle schools, this, of course, we have a shorter span of time, but if they attended both 7th and 8th grade, this is the result of that language arts from middle school. So that is where we are at with our content tests in the grades 3 through 8. Okay, Aspire, same pattern. This is where we start to see some gaps coming in. We know that we have students who are coming in, again, always as we see increasing numbers of students entering, they are acquiring English. We are also looking at students who may not have attended with us consistently or attended school consistently. This is where we see our largest gaps. Our largest gap in our Aspire Plus 910 data is in language arts. We have about a 9-point gap between the state average and our own average. And the smallest gap is in mathematics. We have known that our mathematics program does move us toward kind of the top of that growth. Our students do well in mathematics across the board in this district, and they do well in science as well. So those two are smaller, but as we are continuing to make sure that students are confident in our language arts, again, that becomes part of our K-12 literacy plan, where we are really beginning to focus with our new curriculum that we began with last year this was our first year, sorry, this is our first year of our Reading Horizons reading classes. We're seeing more of that work happening at the middle school and the high school level to really support those readers as they come in lower than average.
Dr. Hall?
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just so the board and you are aware, in 10 minutes.
Oh, we stop.
We do
Okay.
have a time
All right.
certain. I'm not asking you to stop now.
I'm so
but at
done.
7:30
I'm
I
so
will
done. Here we
stop
go.
you so that we can go to the
Yep.
Board of Canvassers.
Thank you for the reminder.
You're welcome.
Okay, here we are. This is grade 9. They attended our middle schools, same thing, went to our schools in the 9th grade. ACT, I do want to just talk a little bit about Highland High School. So ACT, composite, English, we can look at those. This is kind of an interesting thing, again, as we look statistically, if it's significant with the number of years. This is our language arts or ELA proficiency from last year based on the number of years that they've had in the district. If they were only in our district for 1 year, that's the purple line. The teal line is a multiple year. One of the things we also wanted to look at was to see if there was a difference when we looked at that between a non-Title I or a Title I school. And there is not. We see that difference carries across all of our schools when we think about whether or not students have been there consistently. This is just a quick look at how things break down. Again, teal is our Title I schools, and the purple ones are our non-Title I schools, but it's a look at proficiency across income. One of the things that we do know is that we have some true outliers in terms of schools that overall are performing well, and we continue to look at the things that they are doing and make sure that we're able to work with other schools to replicate some of those same successful practices. I do want to just very quickly talk about Highland High School and one of the interventions that they have put in place. This is one that we have collected some data on. 2 years ago, Principal Chatterton decided that they were going to look very specifically at reading comprehension and literacy building strategies in the language arts class. He challenged all of his teachers to complete the ongoing professional development that was in our Elevation software. These are modules that are ongoing. Teachers completed them throughout the year. And at the same time, they participated in job-embedded coaching with their literacy coach there, who would either model, co-teach, or provide feedback after an observation on the research strategies that they would all take a look at. So in this first slide, the purple is for the 22-23 school year, all of the students on the Aspire Plus that demonstrated growth from the previous year, their 9th grade year, to their 10th grade year. So the only thing that really changed in the way that they came to their instruction was this focus on literacy comprehension and building reading skills. And so as you see across the board, it's interesting because, of course, language arts and reading really, I mean, you focus on, you know, what you're looking at changes. But we also saw changes overall, and especially in science, which we know is very often reading-based or reading-supported. To see if that continued, this is not and on top of that, but the second year, we continued to see that growth, not as perhaps significantly, but they continued to grow from those students from 9th grade to 10th grade. But the most interesting thing about this data when we look at it is the chart beneath it, and especially if you would look at our low-income EL students and students with disabilities. You'll see that they sustained in the first year about 66, 60, and 64% of those students made growth on the Aspire test. And the second year, that those numbers were especially for our EL students and our students with disabilities, we had an even larger population of students that demonstrated growth as they went through English language arts classrooms that continued this focus on specific strategic literacy interventions.
Can I ask a question about this? This is related to one more of those things we talked about last year, which was, we talked about adding co-curricular information to the dashboard and updates from principal assessments. So it's nice to see like a school-specific update. The reason I mentioned adding co-curricular information to the dashboard as I'm looking at like social studies teachers in the audience is that we're never gonna get a social studies test. We're never gonna find out what students had a robust PE program and what students did not, and all those things impact these scores. So I guess what I wanna say is, as we look at some of this information in a vacuum, we did make that ask for more co-curricular information in relationship to success, especially as we look at that income chart, and when we look forward to after the Canvas, talking more about CSI and TSI specifically. I think it's a concern where, as we try to move these tests up microscopic percentages, we end up losing these other programs, sometimes in a trade-off, that make a difference in student experience and in their test results. That if we lose access to something like a history fair, for instance, because we're concerned about adding more explicit ELA instruction, and we still don't see the ELA instruction moving up, we don't know that it could be related to these other co-curricular factors. So this is not specific to the Highland Aspire Plus, but just to say, as we synthesize some of this information, those are things we asked for also. And I think that co-curricular information and principal self-assessments would help us get a more holistic interpretation of some of the figures that we're seeing.
Thank you. All right.
Okay.
Do you want to start, or do you want us to wait
Got
and come?
3 minutes until we need to.
Can I ask some questions
Please.
on the one that we looked at? Could we go back to the slide that had kindergarten on it?
The KEEP or the Acadians?
Yes, okay, and then there's going to be the slide after that as well, oh, the one that we were just on. Okay. So, when you look at the one that's below benchmark, and we had almost 10% that slipped down below, and I know that that's something that teachers are always very anxious about maintaining students, at least maintaining them where they're at. Okay, so there's that 10% one there, but then if we go to the third grade slide, I think that's in a couple of slides, okay. Now it's 12%, so it's not quite as significant. I mean, if you look at, it's only a 3% increase. what I'm getting at is with Acadians, and it's been 3 years now since I was in the classroom or whatever, in those early grades, there are different assessments that occur, like in kindergarten, the nonsense words and all of those sorts of things, but then they drop out as the child advances. And I think sometimes what happens there, and I want you to reaffirm this in my mind, maybe I'm incorrect, but some children are very good at nonsense words, and they can score really high on that part, but then when you get to the others, it's more problematic for them. So when that drops off, it makes it so that they slip down because they don't have that particular portion that brings them up. Is my thought process correct there?
You know, what an interesting question, because when we were doing the state evaluation of this, when it was still called DIBELS, I remember meeting with the evaluator that was going to be doing this for the state, and he was really frustrated because he kept saying, but nonsense word drops off. How am I supposed to evaluate this test year to year when the test components themselves keep changing? Kind of the same question.
And that's what I'm getting at, because to me, oh, sorry.
Reached 7:30, I'm so
Maybe
sorry.
we could just continue.
We'll continue when we're done with the Board of Canvassers. So we have reached our time certain, 7:30, for the Board of Canvassers to open. So just for process sake, Board, we need to adjourn the public meeting that we are currently in and open up a special public session of the Board of Canvassers, which will be us. We'll have a presentation of the affidavit, a presentation of the November 5th, 2024 election results of the special bond election, and then we'll have a couple of motions that we'll need to move through in order to approve those results as in acting as the Board of Canvassers. So we don't necessarily need to make a motion to adjourn. I'll go ahead and move that now, that the Board of Education public meeting is now adjourned and that the special public session of the Board of Canvassers is now open. I'll turn the time over to Business Administrator Kearsley to present on the affidavit.
Thank you. First, I'd like to thank Ryan Bjerke from Chapman Cutler, our District Bond Counsel, and Alex Buxton from Zion's Public Finance, our financial advisor, who have kind of helped us through this process and are also here to make sure we do this part right as well. First of all, I do present to the board an affidavit certifying that this board meeting has been properly noticed as per the requirements of section 52-4-202 of the Utah Code, and that there was not less than 24 hours public notice of the agenda, date, time, and place of the November 19th, 2024 special public meeting held by the board. So I present that to Board President Salazar. Next step, I would like to present the votes as provided by the Salt Lake County Elections Office. For the Salt Lake City School District special election bond, there were a total of 75,268 votes cast. The number of affirmative votes was 45,961, or just a little over 61%. And the total number of negative votes is 29,307, or just about 39% of the votes. And I present the vote tally to the board.
Thank you, Business Administrator Kearsley. It is now my understanding that I will seek a motion to publicly proceed to canvass and declare the results of the special bond election as noted that Business Administrator Kearsley read out. So I'll seek a motion from the board to publicly proceed.
I move that the board publicly proceed to canvass and declare the results of the special bond election.
I second.
We got a motion and a second on the table. Is there any discussion to the motion?
My only question is, did we need to also order that returns be filed in the official records of the board prior to accepting that motion?
Yes.
Yes, Board President, just make that order.
Yes, so moved. Thank you. Thank you, Ashley.
No problem.
Seeing no further discussion, we will go ahead and take a roll call vote, starting with Board Member Sika.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Ashley Anderson, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Ryan Jensen, yes.
Christy Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
That motion carries. It is now my understanding that we have a motion, correct, B.A. Kearsley, that we need to move to the action agenda, or are there more presentations that you need to give tonight?
I'm double checking.
Okay.
Yeah, so we will now adjourn the Board of Canvassers. We'll move back into Board of Education meeting, at which point we'll have a discussion topic, and we'll entertain a motion to move that discussion topic after discussion to action.
Sounds good. Thank you. So I do now call the public meeting back to order. Dr. Hall, Dr. Marriott, if you'd like to rejoin us. Board Member Jensen, if you'd like to restate your question, and we can pick up where we left off. Sorry to interrupt you in the middle of that.
Okay, while we pull this back up.
All right. While it's being pulled up, we were looking at the kindergarten and the third grade slides. And what I'm trying to do is just emphasize that I think that there are, well, I think when you quoted the state evaluator saying it's difficult to compare this when you're using different.
Well, and that's, and so part of what we had to say, Sam, I missed where my little box is to do that.
I don't know, it's a pretty
So, oh,
cute
got it.
box.
I might have it now. Here? There we go. Duplicate. Okay.
Good job, Tim.
Woo-hoo. Now, go. There we go. Thank you. So we did go over that because, you know, he came from a very much a research mindset that, you know, this test should compare to this each year. But the Acadience test, or the Dibbles test at that point, was designed to act as a grade-appropriate whole. So what would happen is that if a student did really well, say, on the nonsense word fluency, and for those of you who aren't familiar with what that is, it takes a consonant, vowel, consonant pattern, but the idea is to see if students can recognize the pattern, not necessarily the word. So you might think of, you know, like a word like bad, but instead of bad, it would be V-A-D, VAD, a nonsense word. But the idea is whether or not that student could identify each one of those sounds and put them together into a word in that pattern. And so as that goes through, if a student is not doing well on that particular test, then of course we move into those interventions, as you're familiar with, that happen all through the year. They have more frequent testing. They go through all of the different pieces to improve that. But there is a point where, as they have developed, then that skill should be acquired and the test will change, as you've noted, and it will pick up in the next grade, or even sometimes within a grade, those particular pieces of the test will change. And so as they change, then you really, you know, you could have a student, I suppose, that was very, very good at the nonsense word fluency, but as the entire class kind of passes through that, then each test would be considered valid in its year by itself. So while we did talk about whether or not that was going to be a big deal, dropping or moving from one section or type of the test within there to another, statistically, it's a large enough sample across the development of the test that we don't really look at that and say, well, they were really, really good at that, and so that's causing our drop-off. We could be dropping that off. I don't know how to really kind of get at what I'm trying to say here, but there's not a section of the Acadience test that would weight that score so heavily that it would make a big difference the next year when they weren't doing that particular section. So like if you really rocked the retail every single year, then that would still not be enough to really move that completely. Like one section of that test would not make an entire difference from year to year or from administration to administration.
Okay, so what I was wondering was, because when you see that, it's concerning, you know, close to 10% and then 12% or whatever. So I was trying to see if some of that was due to the way that the testing was
Yeah, no, you're right in that the test does get more difficult as it progresses.
right.
But I guess it's not one single section of the test that will do that. What students are asked to do as they are demonstrating a greater degree of literacy and comprehension throughout that process, that does become more difficult. I guess it's not particularly one piece that might make that big shift. It's that the entire test, as you drop off those pieces and pick up some of the others, does get more difficult year to year.
So just the final question then, do you have any information as to why they're dropping like that? Like moving from below to well below?
You know, that is one of the things that we look at in every single classroom. Is that because it's a student that's new? Is it because, you know, and again, these are all of our third graders. So one of the things that we're looking at, for instance, in our letters is classroom by classroom versus school by school versus grade by grade, you know, so looking at those specific pieces. But that is where we begin to see, especially in third grade, where we're moving into a more complex and a harder reading level.
Oh,
So
yeah.
nationally,
I mean,
this is
third grade was critical. I mean, that
it's,
was.
yes, this is the turning point.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. This is a
okay.
tough year, and that's why we focus on grade 3 at this point in the conversation, because right here, if we aren't capturing them back, then it gets
You're gonna lose
harder every year after this to bring them up.
And to catch up.
Yes, thank you. Okay, all right, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Marriott. I'm going to hope this cord gets longer.
Okay, you can click for me if you want.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for having me here. I'm happy that some questions were asked and that you're interested in the accountability system. It's about a 240-page manual from the state, and it is widely available on their website. They really have it written in pretty plain language. It's just a lot. So I tried to cook it down to something that's reasonably clear. And if you just want to focus on those two pie charts, there's a slightly different way to pull all of these pieces of assessment data together to kind of make a judgment about whether a school is doing great or pretty good or very, well or not so well. So elementary and middle schools, you notice that the blue, 2 shades of blue, proficiency and growth in equal measures, about 1/3 each, and that is strictly based on the RISE. That's 3rd through 8th RISE testing, and it's important to note that's equal parts English language arts, math, and science. So in the old days, back with No Child Left Behind, we looked at reading and math, and that's pretty much it. Science has a full component in this new accountability system, so that's important to note. In the high schools, it's half. The blue pieces are about half the pie, and that is proficiency and growth on the Utah Aspire Plus, and that's also language arts, math, and science, I believe. 9th and 10th grades only. So you start to see that this overall metric for a school Doesn't necessarily include every student in the school. Doesn't include kindergarten students and Acadients or second grade students and their Acadients reading or math. But what it does include is shown on these pie charts. The light green is the growth of the lowest 25%. So the students scoring in the lowest 25% of that school. And so we count their growth again. So they're in the growth in the dark blue, and then they're counted again for a full 25% of the pie, 17% of the pie for elementary and middle, and about 11% of the pie in high schools. So, and then we have English language learner progress, that's the WIDA test. There's a little piece of that in elementary and middle and a little piece in high schools. High schools have a couple of other indicators as well. Advanced coursework, ACT, and that's earning at least a composite of 18, and then high school graduation. So the state has really made an effort to create a more nuanced and a little richer model that includes multiple pieces. And especially, I think it's important to focus on how much growth matters in this accountability system, which is kind of nice. It's kind of a good thing, not just to say, you know, everyone's got to get proficient, no child left behind. You know, the old model was a little more of a hatchet, and this is a little more fine-tuned. So that's how the model, that's the pieces of the model. The next slide, I just want to point out that this system includes whole school accountability, and it also includes measurements for each of the student groups in the school. And you can see the list of all of the groups that are counted. So a school with a lot of students who might happen to be in all of these groups will really have all this number of student groups counting for their school, as well as the whole school score. It also, the system includes single year and multiple year data. Some of the accountability designations rely on a 3-year average the school might have earned. So again, they're trying to raise the quality of that model to make sure there's not some small fluctuation that puts a school into a designation or unfairly labels a school. And then the last concept is the cut score. I'll refer to that. What that means is when you get to the bottom 5% of schools, if you just rank all of their whole school scores of all the schools in the state, right at the very bottom, the lowest 5%, whatever that score is that delineates the bottom 5%, that's the cut score. So if you have your whole school or a group that is scoring in that bottom 5% of the whole state, that's the trigger for most of these accountability designations. So, and stop me anytime or just pull up that 240-page document and they have all the answers. I don't even have all the answers. I'm trying to learn it as I go. Okay, the next page has kind of your cheat sheet for these groupings or designations, and kind of going in order of how serious the situation might be. So TSI.
Can I go ask a clarifying question before you move on? Excuse me. I'm wondering, you talked about No Child Left Behind, so what you're talking about now is Every Student Succeeds, or ESSA, right?
Yes.
So, but to be clear, we just looked at a whole bunch of data, but these designations you're about to talk to are only about the RISE scores, right?
The RISE and then the WIDA for the ELL growth. And
So
for high schools, those
the
other couple
additional
pieces.
metrics,
Yes,
but like
correct.
essentially,
Correct.
we're talking mostly about proficiency and growth on the RISE, which
Yes.
is only one of the tests we talked about.
Yes.
But the second thing is, the state determines what that test is, but this is a federal requirement, right? So the state of Utah is not always making the decisions about who would fall into what categories. It's a federal designation that's divvied out to the states. Is that true?
I would say the federal requirement is that a state create an accountability system and create these same designations. TSI, ATSI, those are federal language, but the state has the latitude to create the system that works for the state. So the federal didn't come in and say, okay, you're going to need to take your RISE and make a cut score. The state invented the model and, you know, created it within the parameters that they're required to.
Thank you.
Yeah, good questions. Okay, so TSI, targeted support and improvement. That's if there's any student group in a school that's falling into that below the cut score in the bottom 5% of, and it's bottom 5% of Title I schools. So then that subgroup or student group is identified for TSI, the school is identified for TSI. And I think a nuance of this, like I said, I'm not 100% on that manual. I think they have to fall into that for 2 years in a row to be identified for TSI. And we have a lot of groups identified in TSI. We have had a lot of groups over the last several years identified in TSI. It's kind of an ongoing situation in many of our schools. They identify Title I schools and non-Title I schools alike. The next level, which really for us, the state just started talking about this last year, and that's ATSI, which is Additional Targeted Support and Improvement. And that's when you've been in TSI, and now you have a 3-year average, your 3-year average compared to the cut score 3-year average, you're still falling into that below the cut score. And so last year we started with some schools identified as ATSI. This year we continue to have schools identified as ATSI. And there is an exit plan for how they can exit. There's a little bit of a multi-measure. You have to earn partway towards having your group hit 55% or 57 if it's high school. You also have to score higher than the cut score that identified you in the first place. So there's some nuance around that. And then as we go up the seriousness, then there's CSI, which is Comprehensive Support and Improvement. And we have 2 levels of that. We have whole school CSI. We've had several of our schools identified as whole school CSI. Right now we have Liberty and Franklin for academics. We have had Benyon as well. They're closed now. But we have had schools in whole school CSI, I would say ongoing, since this accountability system was designed, just a couple at a time. We now have a new group called CSI for low performing groups, and that is when you're thinking a student group is consistently low performing. They've been in ATSI, they have not exited ATSI within 4 years. So you can see that they're advancing this system, like a little bit of identification and on to the more serious levels. So any questions about that? And again, there's a little method for how you exit that status. And coming up, there is also some information coming about what happens if you don't exit. And that will be a new designation called more support and intervention.
And just
So
to
we'll
reiterate,
see.
that designation you're talking about is coming from the state.
Yes.
It's not a district
Correct.
decision. Okay.
Correct, yeah. Okay, there also are some designations for non-Title I schools. There's a designation called Springboard, and that's where they will choose some non-Title I schools that are in the very lowest performing in the state. They'll pick 5 elementary and 2 middle across the state during each cycle to help support non-Title I. There's another designation called Elevate, and that's a voluntary. So for non-Title I schools that have TSI and ATSI groups, and you can see we do have one school that has taken advantage of that Elevate program as well. Okay, and then the last slide is just your list of what our current status is for our schools. We do have one school innovations in TSI for one student group. We would have more in TSI, but they've advanced into ATSI, except for every year we do have some that successfully exit and move out of TSI. Last year we had a pretty good list, 5 or 7 or so schools and groups that exited TSI. And so then you can also see last year we had some ATSI schools. This year we've added a few more to that. So you can see our list of ATSI schools and groups. Some of those are non-Title I schools, for instance, East High and West High and Highland High, those are not Title I, but they're still designated by the state. In fact, Elevate is or East High is our school that applied for the Elevate program, and they're receiving some extra support from the state, a good amount of extra funding. It includes coaching and professional development, so I'm really pleased that East High has embarked on that. For our CSI whole school, you can see our list there. And then for our CSI low-performing groups, these are the new designation schools. And so those are all Title I schools, and you can see the school and the group. You definitely can see a strong pattern. The common thread for our CSI low-performing groups is students with disabilities. I feel like this is a strong signal for our district that we can do something as a district systemically to support schools with students with disabilities. It's also a pattern across the state, but I would say by my looking at statewide data and designations, it's even stronger, a little bit stronger in our district than what we might see in Granite or Ogden. Nothing scientific, but I'm working on building a data set so we can query that data a little bit more to determine, just how many differences we might see between similar districts and ours. And then I do want to highlight, this year we had three schools successfully exiting ATSI, and I really apologize I didn't get the third one on there, but Whittier for students with disabilities, Hillside for African American, and Slicksy High School for students with disabilities. So that is excellent news for those schools. And then if you have questions, I have a little bit more information about what happens next or what will happen for these schools. I don't know if that would be your question. For the most part, the response that schools will have to make is to go back to their school improvement plan, review it, make sure it meets all of the criteria that the state lays out for any school that falls into one of these designations. For TSI and ATSI, the school goes back to their school improvement plan, ensures that what their action steps and strategies have been laid out, that they will address those groups. And then the district has the responsibility to review that and make sure the schools are doing the work and they're doing a good job and it's likely to impact those groups. For the CSI low-performing student groups, it's actually on the district to create, go back and create a review of that school improvement plan with the school, come up with any needed new processes, new action steps, different focus, make sure everyone at the school is aware and is moving forwards to address any shortcomings that those groups are now facing.
Christine, is there also state money that's coming in to support schools?
Yeah, so for CSI whole school, there's been a good amount of funding, enough for at least one more teacher in the school and some other activities. For CSI low-performing student groups, there will be some funding. We don't know exactly what yet. It should be coming in about January that we'll be able to apply for that. And we will have a lot of choices about how to deploy that money. We may want to push that through to the schools so they can use it for their activities in their SIP, their school improvement plan. Or we may want to combine it and provide maybe some coaching or some professional development or what looks like might meet that, kind of if there's similar needs in all these schools, what can we do that's the most impactful?
I have a follow-up question about the students with disabilities. That, the reason why I asked for sort of this report to be attached to the data is we can look at the data in a vacuum, but it only means something in terms of what the state requires of us. So we can, kind of parse where we are on any kind of testing band, but it means specific things to the schools that have entered. And I guess I'm concerned and excited to see some of the reports you produce that we have about as many schools entering as Granite, despite our much smaller size, and so that's alarming. Mm-hmm. So when you raise the thread about the through lines, sometimes when we get our data reports, we are told that, students with disabilities are under the N size that can be reported on. So how do you explain the discrepancy between sometimes we aren't able to get information about students with disabilities in our public meetings compared to now we're hearing, that this is an alarming problem from the perspective of the state?
If you look at a certain grade level, one grade level, or even just a couple of grade levels, you might indeed have too small of an N size to, put those on public-facing charts and information. Most of our schools do have enough students in that student group to have a N size that counts, so that they count in these systems. I would be surprised if you're not seeing for most of our schools, other than before we closed schools, we had some really small schools, and you definitely, if you have, 11 students with disabilities in a school and there's only 6 of them in grades 3 through 6, we're probably not going to show you those bars on a chart. But we have less of that now that we've combined some school groups and we have a little bit more robust kind of right-sized schools now. You're going to have better data actually to see. You'll have less of that excluding of data. I did notice across the state a certain number of charter schools and smaller schools, one way they get out of ATSI or CSI is that their group size falls below the number that can be counted. That's probably not going to happen for us in the SWD. We need to actually improve in proficiency and growth. So,
Do you know, what percentage approximately of our district students are identified as students with
I
disabilities?
think
Is that a
we're at
number we know?
about 12 or 13% or something, yeah.
Any other questions for Dr. Hall or Dr. Marriott? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for being here and for
Thank you.
compiling all of this for the presentation.
Thanks for that.
All right, up next on our study session agenda are board goals, benchmarks, and implementation strategies. Superintendent, I know there's an exhibit that is attached that we've talked about loosely with board leadership, and I think talking about it with the full board would be really great.
So Sam, are you able to, I did not prepare a PowerPoint presentation of this because it's just a handout, but this to give a different because it's just a handout, but at the board goals. This to give a different because it's just a handout, but at the board goals. This because it's just a handout, but at the board goals. This because it's just a handout, but at the board goals. This because it's just a handout, but at the board goals. This because it's just a handout, but at the board goals. This because it's just a handout, but at the board goals. Thanks, Sam. Here we're just trying to capture this in a way that made it simple to look at, and also got at some of the impact or the intervention strategies that we're going to be using over the coming years to give you a sense of implementation and what that looks like. These aren't full implementation plans, of course, but looking at these high-impact strategies gives a sense of where we're going with the activities, as well as laying out some one-year goals and some five-year goals for each of these pieces. So with literacy, rather than going through all of this and reading it, but rather just to explain it, we also have here tonight, we have Dr. Tiffany Hall to speak about literacy. We have Laura DeShazo, who can speak about CTE and answer any questions, and Dr. Leeson Taylor, who can speak about the attendance, should you have any questions. We also tried to capture the student, the strategic plan for student achievement, where this rests with the goals. That's been in other presentations before, but just wanted to be able to provide you information that helps you decide how to move forward as a board and what you'd like to do with these goals, trying to give that picture. In addition, just one more piece, and that is below these, Sam, if you could scroll down, and I'll just keep talking and then turn it to the board for your discussion of what you'd like to do. Could you go down to page 6, Sam, if you could? Thank you. So Laura DeShazo put together this information looking at the CTE enrollments. There's a question on the CTE classes that are provided to our students by high school. And so we've got all of the CTE classes here. Now, she's grouped them into some categories because the list of classes is so long and rather complicated. Also, the numbers here are interesting. So what Laura has pictured here is you'll see on the left-hand side the table, it's showing you all of the different programs at West High School by category. So your JROTC, your AVID program, your driver's ed, world language, fine arts, science. And then the unique number of student enrollments, which means how many classes were taken, essentially, by students. The interesting piece of this is just how many fall into the category of CTE, how many unique enrollments fall into CTE. So it's a substantive part of all of our high school programs when you put all those classes together into the one category of CTE.
Can you explain to me on that chart why something like ELA or social studies or math that are required are not a substantially higher percentage?
I think it captures the enrollments, actually, and the CTE, and Laura, maybe you can explain this better than I can, but there's so many CTE courses that they're all caught in that category of CTE.
I think if a student has 8 classes and one of those is ELA, it would be about 13% of all the enrollments would be ELA.
Oh, thank you
See
for,
what I mean? So that shows you every student is probably taking ELA.
thanks for that.
I think so.
Yeah, and if you read the previous slide, I was looking at it, it explains its unique classes. So if they were to take an apprenticeship that takes 4 periods, all 4 would count as unique enrollments in the CTE category. So that means most likely students are taking around 1.5 to 2 CTE classes, whereas you would only ever take really 1 language arts class at a time.
Thank you for that, too. We're gonna hire you guys on here. That's exactly right.
She's
So,
from my area.
Sam, if you can scroll, huh?
I just wanted you to know that Ella's from my area, so.
Oh, really?
Just wanted you to know that.
Hers, and that's why she's able to.
He's
Sam,
impressive.
that second half of the chart, thank you, right there. So then this looks at the CTE courses themselves and what categories they fall in, and how many unique enrollments there are. And Laura can speak more to these courses, of course, but you can see where our students are taking courses, where their interests lie, and what's offered in that high school. And so we have this, if you'll scroll down to East High for us.
May I ask a question?
Please.
Yeah.
I had a really hard time moving through all of this. It was a little difficult for me to, try and put it in my brain to understand it. And so what I came away with, and so please correct me if I'm wrong, is that less than a quarter of our students are taking CTE classes.
I don't know where that,
Because I'm just looking at the percentages.
It's much higher than that.
Okay, because it's confusing, when I look
Yeah.
at this, and I see that it doesn't make sense to me,
Do you know what we've
And
got?
so that's why when I'm looking at it, I can see arts and entertainment and design, that 22% of our kids are taking that class.
So if you scroll to page 5, it actually explains how the numbers work.
Right, I get that, I do.
I feel like I should
Because
just
they
come
can
up.
be multiple, kids can be counted multiply.
yeah.
I think that's what Christy's also saying. We're not getting an answer to our question, which was about how many students are enrolled per school and what percentage of the school is participating in what way.
in
Because
what
we're
way.
getting duplicative enrollments over long periods of time, like
Right.
multiple
The
semesters.
question was about what courses were available at the high school, so this is a way to portray what
Right.
those courses are at the high school. So that's
And
what we.
that made sense,
are
as I'm
answering here.
looking at the courses, what I'm trying to understand, because as, I'm sorry, what is our student's name?
Ella.
Ella. What she explained is exactly the way that it was put in my head with your explanation, that kids can be counted multiple times. And so I'm just trying to figure out, as you look at a percentage of our kids that are at each individual high school, and you can see all the CTE courses that are there, what's the percentage of kids in our current high schools that are just engaged in CTE? Not how many classes they're taking, because this is, I can see, and you can say that it's, you know, multiple classes that they're taking. But when you look at Highland High School that has 2,000 kids, what's the percentage of those 2,000 kids that are taking CTE courses?
So that percentages on there is based upon the total number of students taking the classes. So I do want to say that, I'll just use English as an example. The identifier of what the course counts for is how they were grouped. So even a journalism class that might only last for a semester does count as well. So there are semester-length classes even in the core content areas as well. The CTE classes, the percent that's overall is based upon the total enrollment of them. And I did not put the total on there so I can see how that would be confusing. But for East High School, and I can't read if it's what the total percentage is right here. 18.8. It is 18.8% of the overall enrollment in that high school of what is CTE categorized in our power school system.
And all the students have a CTE requirement.
Yes, 1.0 credit to
1.0
graduate.
to graduate, that's one class, or two.
Or two, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so I'm just trying to get that overview of how many kids are, as you have pointed out, Superintendent, that you want to have 100% of our kids in some sort of a CTA program on a pathway.
On a college or career pathway, so
pathway.
a college pathway like AP or IB.
Right.
Something like that would count as well. Career pathways count too, but just have a sense of where they're headed
Right.
with their academic or workforce sort of career plans.
Right, okay, so when it says 100% of students on a career or college pathway by 2029, that's the goal. And so as I'm looking at this, I just want to try and put that in my head so I understand, you know, that a child can take one class, they get their, that's all they need, you know, to
As the minimum,
graduate.
yep.
As a
Yep.
minimum, and that's it. And so as you look at that over the course of the year, I'm just trying to see how many of our kids are consistently every year outside of that graduation requirement wanting to be involved in our CTE classes.
I think you can see here that a lot of the enrollments are in CTE. So more students are participating in CTE because of their interest in these different things than in English language arts, for example. So they're taking more CTE than English language arts.
And
It doesn't-
Is that true to our, as our students are looking at, you know, because I don't have kids in school anymore, and so I'm kind of leaning into our parents, you know, to know, is that actually true?
Yes, and what we're trying to do with the pathway idea is to say, it might be interesting to take a photography class and then come over here and take a single EMT or fire course or something like that, or try one of these other things. And students are taking a smattering. And the bottom in the career clusters, if you'll scroll down just a little bit to show the bottom half of that page, Sam. So that shows you where their interests lie in the CTE program. So they're doing that. What we'd like to try and get them to do is start building a pathway sequentially. So to become a CTE completer, they're taking 3 courses, I believe, is that right, Laura?
That's correct.
Over the course of their high school, in a single pathway, so they're headed towards something. So there's value in both the experimentation across different things like this. Arts and entertainment and design obviously is really interesting for students to take those courses. We'd love to see more of them choosing to become a little more specialized and get a little more deep into their area of interest in their high school career a bit, so that they can take these courses as electives to explore different things, or to get a little more focused on a particular pathway, so they can delve more deeply into areas that may hold their interests.
So Superintendent, I want you to be able to finish go ahead and finish
Oh,
your
yeah.
thoughts, and then we can swing back
Oh, I
into
just
a
wanted to
discussion.
explain what these were, so that just
Perfect.
gives you a sense by high school of the kinds of CTE courses that are being offered. Laura did do a great deal of work to pull all of the enrollment data on all of the CTE courses from all of the high schools. I did not present that to the board because it's a whole lot of data. It's hard to make sense of it. It's hard to ask a question of it. It also is quirky data in that sometimes 2 students are enrolled, but it's because that class is cross-listed with another class, and that's hard to explain in just the charts. So that information is available if you want to see how many. You can see all of the course taking across each of the high schools, actually, including CTE. You took all the courses, didn't you?
I did. Mhm.
So she has those enrollment patterns. This was a way of trying to just present it in a way that gave you a little bit of a picture of what's going on in the high schools and course taking.
Can I answer your question as a parent? Because Christy asked for that perspective. That the thing that I'm still not getting from this is when we look at the clusters, it's not identifying for me the concern I hear from parents and the concerns that were raised in our last meeting. So for instance, if you scroll down to Highland, this shows me, keep going, this shows me what areas these classes are in, but it doesn't show me why Highland doesn't have business classes in their catalog and that East and West do, but that I also don't know where the business class would be in this, within the career cluster, unless I cross-reference these. So I'm not getting the information about what's offered at each school to identify where the gaps are. Because when we're being asked to consider a new goal, it should be to fill some kind of gap and not just to supplement a program where we're saying, lots of kids are doing this, there's a great amount of interest in it. That if we're putting resources into different things, we're still not identifying what the gaps are. The reason that's concerning is because the State Board of Education is about to commence an audit of CTE, and it's my assumption that that audit will address things like transportation. So if I have a constituent who attends school at Highland, who I talked about in the last meeting, who takes the bus to the CTE center and sits and waits for students from East, gets his assignment handed to him and has to go do it at home because the transportation's not aligned, and we're all familiar with the transportation alignment issues we heard about earlier this afternoon. So I'm concerned that this table is not showing us the information we need about what the gaps are or what additional resources would provide. So, for example, I don't know how the things in that implementation plan relate to the cost of those items, and I don't know how they would relate to an audit of CTE, and I just want to say I think it's irresponsible to advance a goal in a department area that's under an audit because we don't know what the recommendations would be from the state. But I really think it's about identifying where the gaps are and if those gaps are represented in our strategic plan. So for example, in the strategic plan, it says, by the end of grade 11, 65% of students are going to be prepared for opportunities by getting 1 credit of AP or IB, concurrent enrollment coursework, or 2 credits of CTE. We don't really need some of this information so much as we need to know what is the baseline 22-23 data? Is it at 45% and 63%, which is what we were told in the strategic plan? Does that make sense? Like an additional thing, at the end of this year, we're supposed to already assess if our pathway completion increased by 30%, and we're supposed to look at that using USB annual data. So I don't see how we can move forward when we don't know what the gaps are and we don't have that USB annual data nor the audit data. And the last thing is, when we end this, we're reconvening as the Board of Canvassers. And our plan strategically already says that 75% of classrooms are going to be designed to industry standards and that we're going to align our purchases for equipment and supplies. I'm concerned that we just tore out an industrial kitchen, an award-winning industrial kitchen, a Horizonte, to build a facility for adults. And then now I'm not sure, based on this implementation plan here, are we rebuilding more kitchen facilities after we just paid to replace them with something? I feel like there's many moving parts. I don't know where to land, and I think waiting for the audit is probably a responsible thing while we get some more of these questions answered about where, in fact, the gaps actually are. That was lengthy, but I'm done now.
Christy.
So I appreciate this conversation because here's the pro and con of my brain at times, is that I look back on the things that, as a board member, that I have been really excited about and supported and have wanted to just move forward because I knew it was the best thing for kids. And that's what happened back in 2011, 2010, when we talked about innovations and what we wanted that to look like. And when the board supported Innovations High, it was about looking at it being connected to our community college and the opportunities that kids would have, to get college credit, and also be able to look at those pathways at CTE and career pathways. And it was exciting, to be thinking about that. And it's so funny that here we are, in like a full circle again, talking about CTE pathways. It distresses me, that our district, I don't think, let go, but lost that vision, that innovation, that we had almost over a decade ago when we put innovations and put all the money that we did into that building down there. And it's the con that's happened to me as I've looked through all of this is that I've had to look back and say, that school was an award-winning school. It had great, innovative, creative ideas that were going on in it, and we had a full, robust enrollment there, and families from across the Wasatch Front wanted to go to Innovations because of what was there, because it was connected to South High, the old South High, and it had a CTE component to it. And it had a bevy of opportunities for kids to be involved in the medical field or animal training or, firefighting, but also, looking at that a different way of delivering education to kids that might not fit that traditional pathway. And at the same time, going through a really difficult time of aligning our bell schedules, and looking at what was the best kind of schedule so that we could transport kids from all of our traditional high schools down to Innovations. And so as I look at this, I hear the hesitation because of the gaps that we're not seeing, we're not really understanding. But I also am excited about maybe us really looking at not just one site, but, and saying, here, let's utilize one of our empty buildings, to possibly build a CTE center, but to really circle back to the investment that we made at Innovations and to say it was there for a purpose. We could certainly build it up. I think that it would attract families back in, which is what we need. We have a decline in enrollment. We need to look at that. But here's the other part of it for me that I've been thinking about is that, when you think about students and the opportunities that they have in today's age and looking at bridging some of those gaps for kids, that we've always been an innovator in Salt Lake City School District. But what I'd like us to do is just to take, maybe with the audit, take a breath for a second, maybe we say, yes, CTE is, something that we all feel really strongly about, but to look at the resources that we have right now, and how do we look at Innovations, and we say, how do we bring that back up to the level that it was, back in the mid-2015-16, and be able to see all of the things that we provided for students, and the graduation rate, and the amount of credits that they were earning over at the college, and being able to set themselves up, in career pathways. And so it's hard for me, because I drive by that school every single day. I'm on 17 South almost every single day. And I know the vision, and I know what we had for it. So that's the pro and con for me right now, is that it's not that I don't think that we need to put investment into CTE, but what I'd like us to do is just to take a step back and look at what we have now. Is there something that we can change over at Innovations, and look at what was there in the beginning, and also what are the needs of our students right now? Because the 5 pathways that you've identified, Superintendent, I do believe that they're thoughtful and that they're things that kids are interested in. Mm-hmm. But I also think that we need to be looking at the resources that we have, looking at what are we going to be building at Highland and at West, what possibilities are there going to be over at East High, in order for us to take the resources and the assets that we have right now, and look at that in a cluster first. And so it's exciting for me, because it makes me feel like I'm kind of stepped back in time a little bit and got really excited about that possibility of what could happen down at that campus. And also see the realization of the great things that did happen down at that campus. So anyway, that's kind of where my thoughts are right now. I just, I appreciate the conversations that we've been having, but I also am hesitant about launching, forward too fast when we still have so many things, that we need to talk about, to stabilize. And I think that that's one of the things we need to really think about is how do we stabilize our district with our enrollment? How do we attract families in? And continue the conversation about it instead of rushing, to make quick decisions. Not that I think that we're doing that, but I just, it's a cautionary tale. And I went over my time. Thank you.
No worries. I'll go ahead and use my time to participate in the conversation. Hearing a lot. There's definitely gaps. There's definitely hesitancies. And my I guess con or caution right now is the reality that over 50% of our students leave our schools when they graduate. At least those who do graduate. We know there's folks and kids that don't graduate who don't have an identified career or college opportunity. And I actually applaud the superintendent in knowing that level of data. I know it's 10,000-foot view kind of data. And there is a need and a reality and a gap that I think hesitating and waiting on doesn't serve the students that we have over the course of the next number of years until we have new high schools built, until we've identified a CTE center. Is that in one of our old buildings? Is it at Innovations? Is it within the high schools? Is it a completely separate building that we develop or adapt? And my worry is that that we'll be missing out on opportunities for students now, right? This year, next year, and in the subsequent years until we have all of those pieces and those gaps identified. And that is a risk that I'm not sure that I'm willing to take as a voting board member right now. And I really want us to think about that. How do we balance the specific and real needs of students now that could benefit from these types of opportunities while in coordination collectively with the superintendent as a board, with Laura, with Tiffany, everybody involved in these elements of what our students are receiving and gaining to achieve not only high school graduation, but a college and career pathway. I would hesitate that we lose more students to what we already know, which is that 50% of our students or over 50% of our students don't have those. And I don't think that striking that balance while also through the demonstrated either interest or participation that there is significant help that's needed within Laura's department to manage the elements that we need to move this forward in a positive way and also identify those gaps at the same time. So that's just my respectful counter to the discussion right now that we're having.
If I could follow up, I give an example where, in the last meeting, people talked about their experiences with CTE in the abstract. And I, gave the example that if I have a student who's regularly taking the bus to sit, I don't think that is a good use of resources. But the other example I would give is that, Tiffany earlier about literacy talked about the growing pains of implementing anything. And I want to use our apprenticeships as an example. We've talked about really positive examples of apprenticeships, but I have another constituent who did the Stadler program and dropped out after graduation because they were able to find that having a different job and paying for college themselves, they still came out on top of what Stadler was paying them. But also, and I quote, "They never had anything for me to do." I think it is really worth assessing the students we have who are participating in programs and looking at their attrition in the program post-graduation before committing to investment. And I think that analyzing actual student experiences in relationship to the USBE audit is one of the most prudent things we could do. Because to say we don't want to take a risk, but we know that the current things we offer are still providing risks, so we should expand those things to counteract risk. We end up in a kind of circular logic where You know, the USBE audit could be really helpful to us in terms of framing like what other districts are experiencing statewide, how people are navigating transportation problems, and help us, if we did move forward with any kind of new objective or goal, to actually amend it within our strategic plan in a way that we can measure, that we feel is achievable, instead of making decisions where then on the back end, I get the phone call that says, yeah, that sounded really good, but I had to drop out because they never had any work for me to do. I don't like getting that message. And I think it's worth analyzing that type of message rather than advancing something because it sounds like it would be a good idea. The other thing I want to say is I've used my time on this area, but we have 2 other goals here, and I don't know what our objective is timeframe-wise to move forward with them. So I just do want to point out that I have questions about these other goals as well for those presenting staff, also related to the strategic plan.
May I make just a follow-up comment? It's not, I'm not sure that I articulated my comment well enough to make you think that, you know, I didn't think that we should move forward with CTE. What I'm saying is we already have resources in place, that innovations is a gem and could be a gem again. And it's something that could be done right away.
And I get that there's a lot of more to discuss with these goals, and I'm not saying that this is not just a good idea to move forward. And I think the experiences that I can share, that I spoke for myself, were not abstract, they were real. And I don't want to minimize the experiences that you're hearing, Board Member Anderson, but that might not also be representative of everybody's experience within those programs, whether it's transportation issues or whether it's the Stadler Rail component and program that we have available to us. And I think as board members, we run into those types of issues where there's disparate experiences, right, wrong, indifference, true or false, right, that are being reported to us. We have to look at those things through the lens that we have and address them through the channels that we have. And that doesn't mean that we just stop a specific type of program because of, no, not to minimize, but because of one person's experience. That gives us the opportunity to improve and to look at things in a deeper way, which is what I know you're getting at and what you would like us to get at. I still worry that there are real needs now for real students who don't necessarily have the time to wait for us or for an audit from USBE to help us right-size where we're going. And my opinion, based on what I know about other school districts and CTE, is that I think the superintendent is trying to bring what is happening in other school districts, not only here locally in the state of Utah, in Salt Lake County, but also nationally as well. And all I'm asking for is how do we strike that balance without losing opportunities for students in real time while we prepare for students in the future?
Yeah, I'm gonna talk here, you know, as a Black person and speaking on behalf of the BIPOC community, you know. Again, we did talk about this because even Jenny, in her community, they were so excited about CTE. And if we were to listen to those communities, I think we will be able to find, you know, some balance in terms of the importance of this program. You know, in regards to innovations, yes, it is a great school. And unfortunately, due to the instability of going through so many superintendents, that affected the problem, that affected the innovations in terms of like having something that's stable. So for us, we are all here for a purpose of serving our students. And we just looked at the numbers over here, and we saw who is performing and who is not. And we saw how much it affected our BIPOC community. That is just, you know, for a district that is minority majority, we should think outside the box. We do have the resources to make it happen. We do have actually staff who are like so experienced in that. And we do have actually communities that are in need of this. We really do. I know it is, sometimes we do actually forget about the reality when we live in like the haves and haves not community. But the reality is that we do have so many students out there who can benefit so much of this program. We are not doing these programs or suggesting them so we can create labors, but we are actually using people's talents and just finding a way that we can activate those talents. We owe it to these kids. If we are looking like at the history of all the performance of our schools and our students, I mean, we see it consistently. We've been having the same issues, and that's the BIPOC community has always been at the bottom of the barrel. And so it's time for us to like actually shift and change things. And I personally believe that, you know, CTE will be able to serve our BIPOC community. And I'm very certain if we were to have 100 students over here that are from the West, and if we were to ask each one of them, 99% of them will raise their hand and they'll say, yes, go for that program. And I challenge the board here that, you know, if you do not believe what I'm saying, I encourage the student over here to bring students next time and like actually listen to the students, because they are the ones who are out there in the field. They are the ones who are experiencing that. I mean, yes, we do hear from constituents and so, but that constituent is not going to be able to influence or change the path of like hundreds of students in our community. That's the reality we are dealing with here. We need to actually go reach out to those students, and we're going to be able to find the real answer, you know? That's my 2 cents on that.
Is there any additional feedback on the other 2 goals that have been raised? And again, this is a study session. We're not here to make any decisions tonight, but provide feedback to the superintendent and to us as a board.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions.
Can I respond to just this goal for a minute?
Please.
Just to provide a little, I just want to make sure there's a touch of information on the table here. If I may suggest, Christy, that innovations program, so the CLC, which is, or the CTC, sorry, the Career and Tech Center on the bottom floor is the one with all the CTE courses, where one of the challenges really is that, so the innovations with the early college model is on that second floor. They are 2 different programs, even though they were probably meant to be a little more integrated than they are right now. But the main floor with the CTC center there, we've gotten to the point where we can't take more students in those courses because we're limited by space. So our fire science program, we can only fit 1 class in there. And if we had more room, we could have more kids, or more in CNAs, or more in the EMT courses, or what are the other pieces that are oversubscribed? But some of those are oversubscribed. So there's a feeling that that space there is just, we've used it so much that I'd love to have you come by and take a look, because the courses are pretty full in that building. The other one thing I wanted to mention is that I think it might be helpful for the board, and whether or not it's tied to the goals or not, to visit just right nearby in Davis is the Catalyst Center, which is a CTC designated center, which is as large as a high school itself. And it's that way so that it can hold more of these CTE courses that are so oversubscribed. Recently, I heard that Jordan will be building their 3rd site because there's such demand from the students for more of these courses. Canyons just purchased the old eBay building for a terrific price, actually. They got a good deal on that. It's, I think, 4 times as large as the district office here. They're planning to build an innovation center there that is their CTE center. And just one more piece to share to put this in perspective. The state of Utah, I believe, no, I don't know enough about the audit, Ashley, that you raised. Laura, you may know some more. I believe it's actually in preparation for expanding CTE across the state. They want to catalog what's there and what's not there. There's always a caution with CTE that we don't replicate too many of these expensive sites and that we use each other's. But the state will be rolling out, I believe during this legislative session, a new program called First Credentials, which is an attempt to get high school students to have a credential of value as they leave high school. Now that can be the APIB sort of track in our college and career pathways, but it also means credentials in these career paths. They get their EMT or their CNA or their medical assisting or some sort of credential that has some value for them. So that's going to become a state initiative, I think. I just have heard tale from a number of different sources that the state will be moving in that direction. So these kinds of things, I think, will be even more present in our district and in the districts around us that are kind of years ahead in building some of these larger centers to serve the demand that students are expressing around the desire for these kinds of pathways in conjunction with their academic pathways. So just wanted to throw that information out there so that it's clear about those programs a bit. Sorry, Ashley, you were moving on to the other goals.
No, and I can move on to the other goals, and I would only respond to that to be the follow-up I'd have to that is even more questions, which contributes to the ongoing need to discuss this. Because when we look at other centers, you know, Canyons was able to open that after 3 years of board discussion, and we've been discussing this for less than 1 year. And the second piece would be how many more thousands of students they have than we have, which is why I think moving carefully and looking at our high school rebuilds, specifically after the taxpayers really agreed in large numbers to support what we're doing and make sure that our school buildings themselves can offer students what they need, which is in our strategic plan. Like, I think we need to be really careful about tossing out examples that are not analogous to our district in terms of size or the amount of time they've spent discussing it. That those are things I would say. And in relationship to that, the next thing I had questions about was the chronic absenteeism, which is the only proposed goal that is not really substantially addressed in our strategic plan. And I think the chronic absenteeism component is addressed a little bit in engagement pillars, but it's one where we may want to consider adding an amendment as we look at this national problem. But my question for Dr. Taylor, which he probably already knows as I sent it in advance via the superintendent, is simply that there's been a lot of legislative change and we still don't have a clear answer on how we're training principals on what truancy means now and what truancy referral options are, and if one of the reasons we're seeing such enormous increases in absenteeism is simply that we didn't report truancy for 3 years.
Well, it could be good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Sorry about that. I just jumped in. Actually, let me address that in several pieces. The first piece is the training piece. There is a district need, as we've sought this information, for additional training. So you will see ongoing training provided to the principals, the assistant principals, and ongoing DLCs to cover this basis for us. We collected our truancy information. Our numbers are much lower than what they were pre-academic in terms of our referral process. Now, it could be in combination with the new legislation, with the increase of days that are now allowed for a child before they're truant. And understand chronic absenteeism and truancy are two different things. Chronic absenteeism deals with excused and non-excused absences. Anytime kids miss a certain amount of Tier 1 instruction, we're saying that those kids come out at a disadvantage, whether it's for excused absences, going with family, medical illnesses, or things like that, or not. Truancy is unexcused absences only. So when you have kids who are excessively absent and don't have excuses, then we have a referral process that can be implemented to where those kids are being referred to the necessary resources and interventions. So in terms of our numbers, right now for this current year, based on the information that we've gathered from all the schools, we've had less than 32 kids referred for truancy. And those referrals have not been to the youth court. They've really been up the ladder to district, so the district can now work and give assistance with interventions and forming a committee to address those needs. Did I answer your question?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, because it explains why absenteeism is different, but it's sort of like truancy is absenteeism, absenteeism is not necessarily truancy, right?
That's correct.
But we don't know, we don't have an answer of what percentage of chronically absent students we have who would also be, under the new law, identified as habitual truant.
Well, let me
Does
say.
that make sense?
Yeah, I'm with you, but let me add clarity. All 32 of these kids that would be referred would be chronically absent as well as truant.
But we don't know if all principals are, in fact, reporting truancy again. Like, many people
Yes.
still believe you cannot report it,
Yes.
when in
And
fact you can report it again because it's sunsetted in 2023, correct?
That's correct. Effective July 1 of 2023, that rolled through for us. So, yes, there's some additional training that has to take place with that, as well as some additional resources that have to be aligned for this process. So it will be ongoing in terms of nature.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Taylor while we have him at the table?
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Superintendent, did you want to dive into our literacy elements to this as well tonight? Dr. Hall, if there's questions for you, we'd love to invite you up.
I think we've spoken about literacy a lot.
Yeah.
This is our 5th time talking about the goals, so I think we're pretty clear about what that one is. And then, unless there's questions about what's written there, or
Can you
if the
scroll
board
to
would
it?
want anything else. Could you scroll up there, Sam, to literacy? There's a lot there, but, so if you have any questions
a
about
question
those that
there.
you'd like to direct toward.
Board Member Jensen? And
Dr. Hall.
Dr. Hall, do you want to come? We have a question for this.
Okay, when we look at the literacy goal, we have the 70% proficiency, and then we have high impact strategies. Then we get to the 1-year goals. And the third bullet point down, it's ensure every school has a literacy block with at least the minimum number of recommended instructional minutes. Are we sure that that's something that we're going to be able to, can we accomplish that? I guess my experience has been with all of the demands that we have, it's hard to meet the instructional minutes.
And this is particular to the literacy block within the school day, and for elementary schools. And as schools put together their schedules and the area directors worked with principals, we do feel like that each elementary school has at least the minimum number of minutes that are suggested by USBE in terms of a block of time that includes phonics and small group reading practice and on grade level practice. So I feel pretty good about that one. Where that stretch happens is in that priority, as you're well aware. Because if you have, again, I use 100 for round numbers, if we had 100 minutes in the school day and the literacy block needed to be 55, then you have to make choices about the remaining 45. And so how you're using those, I think, is sometimes where schools say, well, if I need to put more minutes in my literacy block, then I need to take them from somewhere else. But I do feel that we are able to meet that now and moving forward. It's just a question of what the rest of the day looks like.
Okay, yeah, so it does play into how we prioritize things and.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's frustrating for teachers because there's lots of priorities. And so they're trying to create minutes sometimes too. I wish we all had, divine power and we could make more power or more minutes in that day. And that was just a concern that I had. And I was also thinking of it because it said ensure every school has a literacy block. I think maybe it would be good to put elementary school because I was thinking in that broader sense. And I really can't speak to it at the high school level because I haven't taught at the high school level, but I know that we have had challenges with the minutes in high schools and, you know, accommodating all of the things that,
Yes.
meeting all of the requirements with the minutes that a high school has. So I was anxious about that.
Right. That would be a great clarification. I will say in the secondary schools, rather than a literacy block or minutes there, we have a reading class. We will actually, moving forward, really look at having a literacy lab and then also a reading 1 and a reading 2 class for students that are like the ones we just discussed, reading below or well below the reading level. This would be a class that focuses on phonics if needed, and then moving up through literacy and reading comprehension strategies. That would be a class that students could choose to take. And going back to our CTE conversation, that would be considered an English language arts class if it was reading 1 or 2.
Thank you.
I have a similar, well, I had a similar question to Brian, but the reason why I was concerned about those instructional minutes are, again, I don't see a crosswalk here between this and the strategic plan. So when we reviewed the strategic plan, Brian had raised specific concerns about minutes in relationship not to literacy but to civics. And the response was that civics could be integrated into literacy, which I fully believe it can. But there was a lot of teacher response after that meeting and approval of the plan that there wasn't necessarily the scope and sequence provided to be able to do integrated minutes in all of these areas. And so I'm worried not about this claim that we want every school to have a block with the minimum number of recommended minutes. I'm concerned that we're, again, you know, putting this cart out ahead of us without actually looking at what's in the plan we already approved.
Sure.
And that's not so much a question for you as an observation across these 3 goals that explains my hesitance. I don't know why we approved a plan and we're not going through it step by step to ensure its implementation, or saying this was a mistake, we need to amend it in the following ways, and instead we're doing a secondary process. I continue to not understand that. But in relationship to this, I want to also point to our last report, which was about TSI and CSI. And if you scroll to high impact strategies and we talk about skills of students in speaking and listening, I fully support that. And I think one concern is that when students enter that, or schools enter turnaround, there are, you know, I was collaborating with the teacher, we were gonna have an inter-school debate tournament that I was running as parent volunteer, and he was teaching. He had to cancel that because of TSI and CSI requirements at the school level. So I don't see how, when we have schools entering turnaround, we can meet these goals when we take away the opportunity to participate in those goals. And I'm concerned too that none of these measurements here talk about students with disabilities. So I would say, I think no one on the board is opposed to continuing our goal of literacy, but I think the way we achieve that is not by identifying new strategies and new goals. It's by looking at our strategic plan, measuring its current effectiveness, and saying, hey, does this actually respond to the largest subgroup of need that we just heard presented, which is students with disabilities? And if we're going to make any changes to literacy, I would suggest that it's related to literacy scores for students with disabilities to make the biggest impact in what is putting our schools in turnaround.
I know that we're very late, but I'd just like to respond in
Yeah.
3 ways. So first, this is more like a pull-out of greater detail with the goal that we have in the strategic plan. So it isn't a new goal, you're correct, but it is in more depth to kind of bring to the front that piece. The second thing is, absolutely, we are looking at our specific strategies for students with disabilities. We have started to collaborate with the Department of Special Education to really begin to see what those IEP goals look like and how we can support general education teachers in meeting them. These are strategies for all students, including our special education students. And we are really trying not to add a lot of new things, but really focus in. Probably our greatest priority in here, as it is also indicated in the strategic plan, is that development of academic conversation that is solid, student-led, authentic communication that will help students be able to really access and own that learning across the board. That's different than just tell me what you did yesterday or do a turn and talk, but it's really increasing that for all students, especially our students who are ELL or might have a processing or something in their IEP that would be strengthened by those pieces. Those are strategies that would help those students really be able to do that. The part about the civics, now going back to the very beginning of your piece, we have outlined, connected to Wonders, a scope and sequence for social studies work. We've updated that to match the new Wonders, and so those pieces are there in terms of being able to do some reading or conversation around the topics that come up in each grade level connected to Wonders, that also then connect to that bigger idea of what does it mean to be a citizen, what is our civic learning. So we have tried to integrate that. We've also attempted to do that in the library, both with social studies and with science. And so we're really trying to make those, maximizing those instructional minutes by making those connections across the grade levels where we can and across the content areas.
That's a super helpful update on civics. Thank you so much.
Dr. Hall, one, I just appreciate you, acknowledging and bringing up that these aren't necessarily new goals, they're just in more detail. And I think I'll speak for myself and feel like I've had some discussions at this table with this board that the current strategic plan for student achievement is quite cumbersome, and that anything that we can do to really narrow in and focus on specific elements of goals, especially ones that relate to previous board adopted goals, would be a benefit. And I think that we as a board have been engaging those conversations. I appreciate, Superintendent, you and your team doing your best to meet that. Moving forward, I have more questions tonight as well, just about how we move forward, in the sense of we've been talking about this a lot, right? And I think that just through the natural course of discussion and the way governance and boards work, that there's always going to be more questions that come up the more and more we talk about it. It's not a bad thing, but it is something that can kind of slow the process down for us. And I'm also trying to balance that with a sense of urgency from this board about how we move forward and adopt some goals, if we so choose, right? And I think that has been a question mark for us this last year in particular, this last school year in particular. And so I think my first question is for you, Dr. Grant, and for Laura, knowing that there are still some questions that need to be answered relative to CTE. Do you feel like you have the questions that you need to respond to the board members who are really wondering where we're at?
Nate,
the foundational level before. Yeah.
Before she answers that, can I just ask?
Please.
The thought process that I went through with these goals was I was thinking that we were going to look at all of the goals, and then after we had looked at the outline for the goals, then we would, have our discussion or raise our question. It's fine the way that, conversations are organic and all of that.
Sure.
But I had some things that I was just thinking, okay, we're going to get through this, and then there were a couple of things that I wanted to follow up on.
Please.
So you can stay there, because I can look over at Dr. Hall, and you can stay there, okay? First of all, I appreciate your explanation about the civics and all of that. It also ties to science as well, how you can integrate science into those minutes and, all of that. When I was asking you about ensure every school has a literacy block, in some ways, I think that this is kind of a relief to teachers to have it be, oh, okay, we are now saying this is the priority, so that if I put myself back in the classroom and when I get told, okay, well, you need to have this and you need to have this and you need to have this, I can go, oh no, wait a minute. The thing that board really looked at and what the conversation was with these goals was, okay, we're going to have, this block. So when I was asking you the question, it wasn't that I was saying, I don't think we should have that. What I was saying is this something that we can achieve and that we can say to our teachers, okay, yeah, we're going to support you and make it so that you will have the ability to accomplish that goal. Whether it's through Wonders and the way that, I know that we spent a lot of additional money on that new Wonders program. Hopefully that's working with, like you're saying, this integration and, helping support that more. That was my concern there. And then, like I told you, the high school part, I think we have to look at that differently or whatever. So I would put in elementary school. Okay, now when we go to the CTE goal, when we're looking through all of those different opportunities that students have for career pathways or a specific area, a cluster that, is of interest to them, I think that that's very valuable. The thing that I'm concerned about is when we have anecdotal, comments were made tonight, hundreds of students, want this class. I really want to know. I don't want to have a statement of hundreds of students want this. I want to know, okay, we have something that showed us that they want this. I know that we have to hesitate about surveying and all of those sorts of things, but to me it seems like one of our impasses here is there's a recognition from everyone that CTE is, valuable and essential, but how do we ensure that we're proceeding properly, for lack of a better word. To me, we just had an election 2 weeks ago, and I think it is wonderful that our community said, we want to have this bond. We are supportive of providing the best educational opportunities that we can to the students that are in our district, in our city. Well, one of the things that they were relying on was in that, and this was referenced, I think by Ashley and I think also by Christy, that those buildings, the Highland and the West, when you went to those meetings, there was discussion about how there would be CTE programs available in those sites, if I was understanding it correctly in those presentations. I want to ensure that parents feel that their voices are being heard, that yes, we're in support of the building of these schools, but where are they in how CTE plays out? Do they think that innovations is the place for us to focus now? Do they think that, we really do need to take the approach that Canyons did and find another eBay building, which I don't know we'll be able to find that, it may take 3 years or whatever. To me, it's a really important part to ensure that the parents, along with their children, their students, are really being reflected in what we're doing. Because when we set a goal that says 100% of the students are going to have a career pathway, or they're going to have their academic, program outlined, are all parents and all students, are they all on board with that? Or are there some out there thinking, oh, I don't know, it might take a little bit longer for us to figure out where we're at on this. We don't know whether we want to go down the, and I'm not saying that you're locked in, but, okay, I was at breakfast this morning, and one of the things that happens, I think, when we start looking at this is it turns into that European model where in Europe, and it was a long time ago that I was there, but when my siblings were, okay, there was the trade path and there was the academic path, gymnasium or trade schools or whatever. We don't do that here in the United States, and I just want to ensure that what we're doing when we create the CTE goal, that it reflects what parents and students are really, what they feel is needed.
It's time. I also want to kind of hear from Jenny and Mohammed if you have anything to contribute to.
I do.
these goals.
I have a few questions. Maybe this was answered before, but the enrollment of ethnicity into CTE, is there a high enrollment from BIPOC, like how he was saying? Mohammed?
I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but I would say that it is reflective of our overall student population in the district. So, but I can get that information for you if you'd like.
Yeah, I think my concern here is, I totally validate what they're saying. There needs to be, I don't know, there needs to be cautious moving forward, but also at the same time, I understand the necessity of retention and providing resources to our community, to Salt Lake City School District, and the declining enrollment of them leaving, right? My thought process looks like this, is from the previous slide or the previous study that we've learned, the minority is not doing well in this system. They're not doing well at all. And to offer a resource like this for them to do well, like I have shared before in previous experiences, personal experiences, that if these things were available to our community, it might have been a different success story. Or we would have been probably on the path, to do better instead of working a 9-to-5 job, or, I don't know if you guys are understanding. I feel like all my words are jumbled because I'm really passionate about this CTE program. And when I say passionate, I don't feel that Christy or Ashley disagrees with it. I just feel like they're trying to logistically utilize our resources correctly. However, I do see the superintendent's out-of-the-box ideas of trying to, have more kids go this path, because we don't have a high success rate in this system. And that success rate is only, I don't know, on this side of the tracks or what? You see what I'm getting at? To allow our people to succeed, how then would you help us out in that regard? What would you provide us if we cannot succeed in this system? How are you going to help our people survive in this, if this cannot be a resource or an option? I've never heard of, a lot of kids going to innovation. I've heard of a huge decline there. But I'm very curious, because the results, I feel like what we're looking at and what I feel the superintendent and her cabinet is truly trying to do is offer a resource to not only just a certain group of people, to everyone. And I don't know, I'm really curious of how we can make this work, because I feel it would be well.
I came up, Board Member Sika, because first, this movement isn't just Laura's movement versus my movement, right? Or the superintendent's movement. What you're saying is exactly right, that when we are, I'm not on, that's okay, I'm loud. But when we look at what our students are doing and learning and what engages them and what brings them into school, and when we look at the skills that they have to have, so, I mean, I've said this before. I was a high school English teacher. I made everybody memorize Shakespeare. I thought that was important. I did this in a Title I high school, which is neither here nor there, except when I look back at that, sometimes I think, did any of my students really come out with what they needed? And about my 4th or 5th year, I started changing the way I taught. And I had much higher level of engagement from all of my students. The ones that were going into business with their parents, the ones that were going to college, because they saw that it was relevant. And about 2 weeks ago, I had my first opportunity to go and take a look at our apprenticeship programs. And first, I'm very sorry about your constituent, but everyone that we saw, we had to pull off of a project to talk to us. And there was a student there, I can't remember his name, my friend with the caliper. Jose.
He's one of my students at Innovations.
Right. And I went over to him and I said, you know, what are you doing? And he in a very detailed way, explained to me how he was measuring with the caliper, because the tolerances for this particular instrument had to be within a 0.03, and on a number line, that meant that he could go to 100.03 or 99.7, and that one of his angles was correct, but the other angle wasn't correct, and he then showed me the complete drawing with all of the measurements. That is some of the highest level math I have seen somebody do. And when we think about what CTE brings, it brings high quality instruction. It brings rigor, and it brings the ability for students to really engage with their own learning in a way that they see can make a difference. And we're not locking them down into a career path. But how many people do you know that maybe thought, oh yeah, well I'd love to be a teacher, and then they take 3 units of I mean, I just picked that because we were talking about it the other day, and they take 3 credits in high school that cost them $0, and they figure out, you know what, maybe that's not the career path for me. Maybe I should do something where I can be alone all day long. When I taught at the university, I had students who figured that out in their 5th year of college, right? The work that comes in these classes, every student is required to take 1.5 credits of CTE, regardless. And so right now we have students that are taking, we have all of these classes available, but a lot of them are taking, if I understand this correctly from our conversations, not the easy, but the Explorer over here, and the Explorer over here, and the Explorer over here. And so by not creating a pathway and saying, we want you to go from Explorer, you've got to take 3 classes anyway. Do something rigorous, develop that grit, really get into a way of thinking that shows you maybe not that this is your life's work, but that you can do hard things. And that in itself is a lesson. And the classes in the CTE pathway, a lot of them start with the letters AP. They are AP Computer Science. They are AP Computer Principles. They are AP Calculus BC. Those are in CTE pathways. And so when you take class number 1 and you take class number 2, sometimes you find yourself in class number 3 and it's AP Calc BC. You wouldn't have gotten there if you didn't start with 1 and say, how do I get to this particular path? I don't know, I'm sorry to come up here on the CTE side, but Laura and I are working together on this because the vision is we make education relevant for students again. That we make sure that they know that they have a place to try out their skills, a place to develop those skills. The other 2 letters that show up in a lot of pathway classes is CE, RCE. Is CE, RCE? Concurrent enrollment. You know, you take your exploratory class, you take your next class, and the next thing you know, for $15 a class, you're earning college credit. A CTE pathway is a way to get half of your AA degree before you leave high school. And that's an option, that's opportunity.
Yeah.
But it's also engaging and relevant.
Yeah.
So, we're not gonna be the right size for all people, but by golly, we're gonna be the right size for a lot of people. And we're going to, sometimes knowing at 17 what you don't like is as important as figuring out what you wanna do for the rest of your life. You're 17, what do you know at that point, right? Your frontal cortex is this big. But they can say, I know how to do hard things.
Yeah.
And if what I want to do next is hard, well, then that's a piece of that, because that's the progression that happens in CTE. And the next step for us is, how do we make sure that our math classes support that learning? Like, I'm learning what they need. They need more understanding of a positive and negative number line, so that when they pick up a scientific instrument, they can use it effectively. So what does that mean for my side of the house? It means we make some changes. What does it mean on the ELA side of the house? Well, we need to know how to read informational text. Did you know that when a student graduates high school and goes to college versus graduates high school and goes into the career field, the reading demands in the career field are higher than the reading demands in college? And it's informational text, and it's informational writing, it's documentation, and that's a skill. How are we making sure on the ELA side of the house that we're teaching that skill? So that it's not just, I can quote Shakespeare. It's, I can read this 252-page accountability manual that Dr. Marriott was talking about, and then write instructions, summarize it for the next person. That's what's important about CTE. It's not just these 3 classes in a row. It's that whole idea of, are we preparing students for that next thing, whatever it is? And it is every single student in our schools, not just because there's a 1.5 requirement, but because every student's got to have something to do when they leave us.
Yeah.
Whatever that is.
Yep. I have, you don't need to sell me a lot, Dr. Hall.
I know, I'm so sold.
Well, well, in my mind, you know, I have already voiced this before, is when I went into this construction business with my brother, he was the smartest man alive, understanding slopes, grades, you know, of how things should be built from the ground up.
Geometry, physics, and
Yeah, all of it.
calculus.
And we sat in college, we went through the college life, and like you said, we didn't understand. Every college student, or every class that I went, when are we gonna use this in our life? When will we ever use this in our life? Those were the experiences that we had. Fast forward, I think my understanding is if we just needed opportunities and resources. And this is what I don't want to fray or deter from, is the opportunity and the resource. Yes, is there a need to show what they're asking for? I think that's valid, the gap, all of that. I think one of my suggestions would be, I remember taking photography at East High School. Is that really necessary?
Yes.
Like, well, probably now because people are making big buku bucks, but what are they teaching us? Back then, we were taught how to do film, print film back in the
I can
days.
print
I don't know,
film,
do
yeah.
we still do that?
No.
I have a dark room at my house. and,
Right?
Yeah, but I don't use it.
Not in the schools anymore, no.
Yeah, I know.
Can I give a follow-up? Because we need,
Ashley, I'm sorry, we
Yeah.
have other folks that are ahead of you in the lineup.
okay, I just need to leave. But I wanted simply to say that no one here has disagreed with this. I want to repeat something Brian just said to me. No one has said we don't need these classes. We've said, what are the fiscally responsible ways to move forward with the goal as it is written?
Right.
So no one has said don't do this. And I think it's fiscally irresponsible to tear out award-winning kitchen equipment from kids and adults who are using it and then say we need to rebuild it some other place. I think we need to move forward carefully. And I don't think anyone has disagreed with anyone else here. And it's been over long because we did not allot enough time for this study. And I find that to be very frustrating.
Thank you for
Yeah.
restating that.
And I understand that. I'm validating that as well. But back to what I'm trying to validate is I feel that you guys are on the right path to offer resources, especially to a community that doesn't get any. I think we speak a lot from experiences of our own, and we tend to forget of other people's experiences. And I hope that we could continue in this process because it may be too late for some of our kids, and I don't want it to ever be. That's it.
Christy, Mohammed, did you have your hand up? Okay, and then Christy.
Thank you, sis. Really, thank you. So, sorry, I have to be defensive a little bit over here, but, my colleague Brian, quoted me of mentioning hundreds, English is my fifth language. I'm not eloquent. I can't put things, in a perspective that, elitist can read, but I can speak the language of disadvantaged communities. I know people in those communities who are actually, talking to me about that. I go to coffee with them. I go to lunches with them. And we sit down and talk about the real experiences. So please, when I say hundreds, that's, making fun of that or referring to that. That is an insult to my intelligence. Thanks.
Okay, let's
Okay,
keep it civil
Mohammed.
if we can. Let's
Okay,
rein it back
no.
in and keep it to the facts.
Okay, Mohammed, I would apologize if that is how you took that. What I said was anecdotal information. And when you say that you go and speak to those individuals, I appreciate that you're doing it. But it isn't very helpful the way that you present that, because guess what? I do too. In fact, I worked for 11 years in a Title I school. I worked with the sorts of people that you're talking about. So I don't think that it is fair there either. I don't want it to be that we're having a division here. That's not what I was saying. I said anecdotal information. All I wanted was accurate information as to what programs students wanted. That's all.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Mohammed. Christy, you had your hand up.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So I think that at times what becomes distressing at this table is that, the open conversations that we have, that people get their feelings hurt or there's defensiveness and you feel like you got to come up and you've got to, tell your side of the story. And the only reason that I felt like I needed to say what I did tonight is because there are a handful of responsibilities that board members have. And one of them is that you are the fiscal agent for our budget. And so to know how to sustain changes in our CTE program, to know how we're going to pay for it, to know how you're going to do the longevity, how many teachers you're going to need to hire, all of those things should be a part of the conversation. It's not that I don't believe in CTE. It's not that I don't think the CTE is something that bridges gaps, because it does. It bridges gaps and provides opportunities for kids. I think that we need to understand that as a board, that if you're not asking the questions about budgetary issues and about sustainability and longevity, then you're not doing the piece of the responsibility that you were elected to do. And so that's why I asked the questions. We have a resource. Superintendent said the resource isn't, big enough. Then you start looking at what are some of the things that we need to do in order to move the ideas forward, the innovation forward, to look at, the opportunities that kids need to have in their lives. It should never be seen as, I'm gonna, stake this and say, I'm against this. Because I don't think that I said that. I don't think that anybody else who made comments tonight said that. We need to understand what our responsibilities are at this table.
Thank you, Christy, and thank you, board members, for our discussion this evening. Vice President Williams.
Yeah, I just had one thing to say. Christy, I appreciate the comments you make about, being fiscal agents of the board, and I do think that's an important piece. And I'm also hearing Board Member Sika as well, being that we have some similarities in the communities that we represent as well. And a thought that I have is that we have 7 different board members here who represent 7 different constituent groups as well. And it's not to say that, all people in Precinct 1 are exactly the same, or all people in Precinct 6 are the same, or whatever it may be. But I think Jenny is onto something, and when we talk about that there are things that are not currently working, and it, in addition to being a fiduciary agent of the district, we all also have a responsibility to represent the people that are not being represented. We have different needs, and really, there are different needs that different students have, and I think we sometimes lose sight that not all students are the same, and we need to get back to focusing on that. And there's that mix of the fiduciary piece, there's the mix of identifying needs, and I just hope that as we move forward on this topic, we can kind of merge those together and think through that a little bit more carefully.
Great. Thank you, Bryce. I think where I was getting at earlier is that we've talked a lot about this this year, and particularly this school year, and I'm wondering, like, at what point do we get the answers to the questions that we need and live with those, or at what point do we make a decision about how we're going to move forward as a district? And I know this is a study session, and tonight isn't the night to do that, but I have heard from colleagues on the board that they're ready to make a decision one way or the other, whether they support the goals or whether they don't. And I think my job as a board president is to acknowledge that we are at an impasse in some ways, not only with the discussion, but we're also at a spot where we either got to trust the process or we keep talking about it in ways that that might not always be helpful, right? And how do we center students at this? And so I guess my next step or my next thought is, what are we going to do next? And I think I'm one of the board members, and I'll speak for myself, who's ready to make a call on what we're doing and what we're not doing. And my thought is that if this doesn't pass at some point in the future, then we continue to move down the path of the goals that we've previously identified as another, in previous iterations of the board. But that's just me. But I think we owe it to our kids to trust our process as well in these efforts. But again, I'm just one board member, your humble board president, kind of putting that out there and hoping that at some point in the near future we can just make a vote and figure out where we're at and what we're doing. And I'm trying to strike that balance within myself as the board president to acknowledge that there's 2 different kind of thoughts on how we proceed, and one is more information, and one is let's get it done or not. So I'm just putting that out there. I don't think we can make that call tonight, but nonetheless, I did feel like it was important, and I was asked by other board members to raise that reality of where we kind of find ourselves in the split, not only on board goals, but in particular the fiduciary elements of responsibility as they're balanced with kind of the realistic needs of students now in the district. And I think that's a fair place to leave it for me tonight. Superintendent, is there anything that you would want to leave the conversation with?
Just that, I think at this point, we need direction from the board.
Okay.
And until we get that direction, I think we continue with our work. I would like to be able to bring to the board the need for some new positions that got lumped in with the goals but are separate from the goals. I'd like to bring that back to the board. You know, they're similar to the goals, but they were brought up separately. They weren't attached to the goals in the way we were trying to bring them forward. I'd like to be able to bring that to the board in the coming board sessions that we have, 2 more this year. And otherwise, I think I will, these are the board's goals. And so the board must decide which direction to go next on these. And then until then, we'll wait to hear from the board on that.
I think this might be a good opportunity for Bryce and I to do some assessment with our colleagues, Bryce, after the meeting and before our next one, and reach out to everybody with a kind of a collective temperature check on where we're at with this in particular. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Moving along, we have a discussion agenda item. As you know, we had our special time certain relative to the Board of Canvassers, and I am looking for a motion to move the adoption of the resolution to the action agenda. So this would be a motion to adopt the resolution finding, and I'm going to say this wrong, I wish Ashley was here to help me with this, but promulgating the results of the special bond election. And so, again, per our governance structure, we would need to move this particular item of adoption of a resolution, of the resolution finding, to the action agenda.
So moved.
Move it. Oh, sorry.
So we got a motion from Christie.
Second.
I second. Oh,
And a
okay.
second from Jenny. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Babe.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christie Smith, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes. That motion passes, and it is our only item on the action agenda, which is the Board President will ask for a motion to adopt the resolution finding and promulgating the results of the special bond election.
So moved.
Second.
We've got a motion and a second. Any discussion to the motion? All right, seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Jensen. Brian?
Brian Jensen, yes.
Christie Smith, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes.
Jenny Sika, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
All right, that motion carries. We'll move into board member reports and superintendent report first if needed.
Not tonight, no.
Jenny, do you have a board member report?
Yeah, just one. With our recent election, I would like for the board to revisit our safe school resolutions for immigration, to reaffirm and just revisit it, and hopefully we could put it on the agenda by, is it December 10th?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's our last meeting for the
Yeah.
year. And Board Member Sika, just for clarification point, would you also like us to revisit the FAQs that are associated?
Yeah,
with the safe
yeah, the
school?
questions and answers, yep.
Okay,
Yep, frequent
great,
questions.
thank you. Bob?
I just wanted to speak to the incident at West High, and I think that our faculty that came out tonight and our students that came out tonight really encapsulated all of it, but I want to speak to the atmosphere that I saw at West High. Initially, it was met with a lot of confusion and disbelief, of course, and frantically trying to gather information that no one seemed to have. And then the following days were filled with outrage from students at not knowing what had happened until so far later, and not knowing who to look to for responsibility or answers. And further down the line today, it's not been forgotten, but rather brushed aside or written off as another incident that occurs commonplace at the school. Just like Ms. Alder said in her public comment, There are frequent medical emergencies in the hallways that result sometimes as products of student conflict, and I just think that this has become, I guess, consequential of everything that has happened and symptomatic, and it's speaking to a larger issue that should be addressed.
Board Member Jensen?
Yes, just a couple of things. First of all, I appreciated the opportunity of being able to go and participate in that breakfast this morning about apprenticeship. And I certainly think that we need to pursue CTE. It's wonderful to see the different avenues that are out there. Then I also just wanted to thank the school communities that are out there. I was at Highland and East at their community councils, their PTA meetings, and when you see, and at Hillside, when you see the engagement and the involvement of the parents in our community, I really appreciate the work that they do, because they are providing opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise, and I want to thank them for that. And then, this is the last time I can give you the reminder. Your Master Board certification is due December 1st. I was speaking with USBA, and I asked Megan Mendez, she's the one that's in charge of that, to send out an email that just showed you how to enroll in case you haven't done that. I'm not suggesting whether you have or not. I was just trying to make it so that it was accessible for you. So if you didn't get one, let me know. And, you know, if you need some direction, because I will tell you, when I was doing mine, there are glitches in this, and Bryce is nodding, okay? They have a new platform that they're using, and there are problems. So please feel free to call me if you are experiencing any of that, or if you want to call USBA, that's fine. I just want to make it so it's as easy as it can be for you if you'd like to do that. Then,
Can I ask a quick question? What if you've completed all of your Master Board certifications over the years? Is there like an extended version to that, or do I just go back and start over?
There is. If you call me, I'll tell you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I just don't want to take more time.
Understood.
Okay. Then there is that new board member training, and you should have that on your calendar, because we've got those new board members, and I think that would be a really important training for them to have through USBA. And then finally, there is a policy webinar, and that is on December 6th, I believe. I'm not getting it pulled up right. Here we go. It is, sorry. It's December 4th at 11 a.m. And there's a Zoom link. Thanks.
Christy? Nothing. The only thing that I would add, and I'll make it short in my report today, is that the superintendent and I appeared before the Utah Legislative Audit Committee today. They released their 2024 audit, in large part a follow-up to the 2022 audit that we were assessed with. You know, we're happy to acknowledge that we've done significantly well with the recommendations from the previous audit, completing 11 out of the 15, and 4 of which of the remaining are in progress. So I applaud Superintendent, I applaud Christina Kindle in the back over there, previous interim superintendent, Dr. Bates, B.A. Kearsley, and your teams for working with the auditors in this last go-around. And we look forward to our ongoing discussions. As you look into that audit, you'll see that there is some significant work that the board will do relative to discussion and in coordination with our associations. And I just wanted to put that out there. We don't have the time, obviously, or the bandwidth to sit and discuss every single detail in a board report, but nonetheless, we look forward to future discussions collectively as a board and with the district and with our association groups. With that, we do have a need for a closed session. Vice President Williams, will you please give us a motion?
Yeah, absolutely. On November 19th, 2024, I move that the board go into closed executive session to discuss the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of an individual, and pending or reasonable imminent litigation, and that upon the conclusion of the closed session, the board immediately adjourn.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll start with a roll call vote with Board Member Sweat.
Christie Sweat, yes.
Bryce Williams, yes?
Jenny Sika, yes.
Nate Salazar, yes.
Mohammed, yes.
Brian Jensen, yes.
That motion carries. Thank you, community, for joining us in person and online. Appreciate it.
Ella. Yeah, you can come up here.
Have it on there. Jones right here. I thought we would do, if there is an update to that one. Here. Okay. So yeah, stick around for that. If there is.
Appreciate you.
Probably not since we're not talking that hearing.
She is involved. Are we gonna do it? You and Leslie still in the same class?
I think you're good then.